Let me just welcome Lloyd the Jongh. Thank you so much for coming. This is the second episode on an ongoing series about Islam. Today he is going to educate us about the Crusades. And the floor is yours. When you want to allow people to ask questions, just tell me and I will open it.
Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, or good morning. My name is Lloyd de Jongh. I am South African. I live in Warsaw, Poland. I lived 11 years in the Middle East. I worked in national security and I had opportunity to travel almost the entire Middle East. I worked with government, police, military, and so on. I designed long-range wide area surveillance systems that protected critical infrastructure from infiltration, from sabotage, from destruction. And because we were protecting lives and property from the religion of peace. So I had opportunity to travel extensively and witness Islam up close and personal in multiple different countries. So today we're going to speak about, amongst other things, so we will be talking generally about the Crusades, the history of the Crusades, that taken from a, shall we say, different perspective, adding information that you may not be aware of, things that are normally left out, because the Crusades is an opportunity, it's a propagandistic opportunity to smear Western culture and of course to promote Islam and play into Islam's concept of victimhood, the perpetual victim. Also, we're going to look at a little bit of jihad, we're going to touch on slavery, and we're going to Islamic slavery. I will cover those in more depth in other shows, and also we're going to talk a little bit about Islamic international law, because the Ummah, that is the entirety of the Muslims, it's a supranation which supersedes, comes before any national affiliation that any Muslim is. So before you're a Brit, for instance, a Muslim who goes from Pakistan, he's a Muslim of the Ummah before he's a Pakistani. He's also, if he travels to Britain, he gets a British passport, becomes a British citizen, he's a member of the Islamic Ummah before he is British, before he is American, before he is French, right? And he's always beholden to the laws of Islam, which is the Sharia. My expertise is in Islamic law and its application, which is known as the fiqh. So on the screen what we have here, I'm going to play two slides from a much lengthier PowerPoint on Islamic jihad. Now, everyone knows that most people do not know that there are 14, at least 14 kinds of jihad, right? So a Muslim could be participating in any one of these 14 different varieties of jihad. I will cover that at length in a different show. The common description of jihad says that it is a struggle, and yes, correctly speaking, it is so. However, the meaning that counts, the one that is most important to us, the most relevant and the most important definition of jihad, we will get to, but this is of course warfare on all non-Muslims to impose Islam by force. We're going to look at the Muqaddimah, 2 pages from the Muqaddimah by Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun, the book the Muqaddimah is called an introduction, let me just change this. The Muqaddimah is an introduction to history, the classic Islamic history of the world. So this is the most famous historian in Islamic history. And obviously he was a historian, so this is the most famous of the historians of Islam, and he founded, well, we'll get into him in a moment. Let's read what Islam's greatest historian has to say to us. In the Muslim community, holy war is a religious duty, because of the universalism of the Muslim mission and the obligation to convert everybody to Islam either by persuasion or by force. Therefore, caliphate and royal authority are united in Islam, so that the person in charge can devote the available strength to both of them at the same time. In other words, there is no separation between mosque and state. In fact, the purpose of the state is to impose the mosque. The other religious groups, here he refers to Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, you name them. The other religious groups did not have a universal mission, and the holy war was not a religious duty to them, save only for the purposes of defense. It has thus come about that the person in charge of religious affairs in other religious groups is not concerned with power politics at all. Royal authority comes to those who have it by accident, and in some way that has nothing to do with religion. It comes to them as the necessary result of group feeling, which by its very nature seeks to obtain authority, as we have mentioned before, and not because the Christians, the Jews, the Hindus, you name them, are under obligation to gain power over other nations, as is the case with Islam. These religions are merely required to establish their religion among their own people. Very interesting that most Muslims who will now immediately start throwing their greatest historian under the bus, okay, this man was a great scholar of Islam, and you'll have ignorant Muslims who will suddenly start to deny these words. But let's continue. Ibn Khaldun, this is in this magazine, Ibn Khaldun, the man who invented modern history, right? From Reagan to Zuckerberg, the enduring relevance of a 14th century Arab historian. You can see here this guy's even on, I think this is on the Tunisian dinar, he's faced. He's very, very important in Islam. Let's have a little bit more about him. He speaks in a chapter on Islamic war by sea. The royal and governmental authority of the Arabs became firmly established and powerful at that time. The non-Arab nations became servants of the Arabs and were under their control. Every craftsman offered them his best services. They employed seagoing nations for the Islamic maritime needs. Their own experience of the sea and of navigation grew, and they turned out to be very expert. They wished to wage the holy war by sea. So Muslims wished to wage the jihad by sea. They constructed ships and galleys and loaded the fleet with men and weapons. They embarked the army and fighters to fight against unbelievers across the sea. Notice, these were wars that were not provoked. These were unprovoked assaults on Europe and other countries. This was the special concern of the provinces and border regions closest to the shores of the Mediterranean, such as Syria, Africa, the Maghrib, and Spain. The Caliph Abdul Malik recommended to blah blah blah, the government or the governor of blah blah blah, that a shipyard be set up in Tunis for the production of maritime implements, as he was desirous of waging the holy war. From there, the conquest of Sicily was achieved in the days of blah, blah, blah. So I'll close that here. Those are the words of the greatest historian of Islam. Here we have here you can see the reason why this is the glory of Islam. This is the Kaaba. This is the holy site, the holiest site in Islam. This is based in Mecca, and you can see the glory of this. I don't think that the Sistine Chapel can compare to such cinder block, dirty, filthy glory myself, but what do I know? Yeah, so you tell me. So no European cathedral can hold a candle to this, the glory of Islam, the right hand of Allah on the earth, the holiest place in Islam, this little ugly square. So yeah, for the glory of this little whatever it is, yeah, this is the Kiswa cloth being blown away, right, revealing the Kaaba underneath the cube. That is the, yeah, anyway, moving on. So let's start with Islam and the Crusades. So I will do a short summary, which I did last week. I briefly touched on this, but we're going to go in much more depth today and look at the actual reasons for the Crusades and look at the Islamic role in it and study some facts of jihad, look at some of the Sharia doctrine, because remember, Muslims want Sharia for the whole world. So this chapter is called Christians Attack Muslims, the Crusades. So the first crusade began during the Middle Ages in 1095 as the result of a cry for help against invading Islamic armies. The first crusade was launched 460 years after the first Christian city was overrun by Muslim armies. 457 years after Jerusalem was conquered by Muslim armies. 453 years after Egypt was taken from Christendom by Muslim armies. 443 years after Muslim armies invaded and plundered Italy. Understand that Muslims invaded and occupied Italy for 400 years. 427 years after Muslim armies first laid siege to Christendom's eastern capital of Constantinople. This happened 380 years after Spain was conquered by Muslim armies, and 363 years after France was first invaded by Muslim armies in the 8th century. Ask your Muslim friends why Muslim armies had conquered Spain and had invaded France in the 700s. Ask them what they were doing in the 700s. Ask them, because they always claim, well, you know, because we were attacked in the 20th century by the Westerners. Well, this is 1300 years prior to that. What were they doing there? If Islam is a religion of peace, what were they doing invading Europe in the 700s? This is 249 years after Rome was attacked by Muslim armies, which is why the Vatican, and we'll see the wall, has that massive wall. So this is only after 4 centuries, 463 years of church burnings, killings, enslavement, and forced conversions of Christians. By the time of the Crusades began, right, by the time the Crusades began, 2/3 of the Christian world, which was known as Christendom at the time, the Christian civilization, had been conquered, and its people were forced to convert or to be enslaved to Islam. Now, without Charles Martel and at the Battle of Tours in 732, the city of Tours, the town of Tours, is about 240 kilometers from Paris. So in the year 730, the Muslims were already in sight of Paris and about to conquer France. Without the efforts of the Templar Knights, Al Cid's Reconquista in 1085, the Venetian fleet at Lepanto, the Polish and the Austrian knights and others at the gates of Vienna in 1683, the Serbian Hajduks fighting off the Ottoman Turks in 1804, without their combined efforts, Europe might have been converted to Islam by force. So during this ongoing permanent jihad that began in the 7th century, almost 3/4 of Christendom's original territory, which included all of North Africa, Egypt, Greater Syria, Anatolia, today what we know generally as Turkey, was all permanently swallowed up by Islam. These areas could have been like Europe, part of the European Christian civilization. However, they became Islamic, and as you know, it's a religion of peace. So, Harry, are there any questions? Or is there anything that I should pause for, or shall I just continue?
No, everything is clear. Anyone have a question?
Okay, I'll just continue. So I'll look at an example of the propaganda that is commonly spread about the Crusades by ignorant or willfully ignorant or ill-meaning people, but whatever. This is the common story which doesn't jibe with the historical facts, as we're going to see. So the History Channel, right, aired a propaganda show called The Secrets of the Quran on the 12th of October 2008, or maybe it was the 8th of October 2012, I don't know. Anyway, it's called The Secrets of the Quran, and there you go. The show explained the ideology of jihad, the Islamic ideology of jihad, as a result of the Crusades. Now, we've just seen that this is false, because the Crusades was the result of the jihad. And they otherwise positively affirm that Muslims are only supposed to use force in self-defense. And this is a blatant lie. I will be all over that in a little while. So, to maintain superficial consistency, major events in Islamic history were ignored or glossed over. The Islamic conquest of Syria, Palestine, Iran, Iraq, and Egypt, although visible on the maps that they showed in our show, was discussed, but in no detail, and they were only characterized as spreading the word of Islam, with that euphemism. Islam was, now many will say, initially viewed as a religion just for Arabs, and technically it is, although according to the Islamic law, the fiqh today, it is not. It is the religion for the entire world and must be imposed on all. So the earliest non-Arab converts had to become affiliated with an Arab tribe, and they were all subordinate. I'm going to jump to the definition of the word deen. I covered this last week. I will do it again briefly, because Islam does not call itself a religion. Islam calls itself a deen. Technically, this would mean you can translate it as a way of life, but it has multiple meanings. So let's have a look at the Lisan al-Arab by al-Misri. Al-Misri is a great scholar of Islam, and he wrote the most detailed 20-volume dictionary of Islam, dictionary of Arab words, called the Lisan al-Arab, which is still used today. This dictionary suggests 4 meanings of the term deen. The first meaning is subjugation or dominance. So the primary meaning of Islam in a political role is to subjugate and dominate. It means administrative or legislative authority, so it's a legal system, not a religion. To put pressure, to be obedient, or use power to enslave or to make others obedient. So it is totalitarian. In Arabic, Dintuhum Fadanu means I subjugated them so they obeyed me. Dintuhu also means I ruled or governed upon him. So it's a system of control based on subjugation, domination, and forced obedience. Thus the word Dayan is used to indicate a person who dominates and rules over a state, nation, or tribe. Notice it doesn't say gently leads, it says dominates. The second meaning is obedience and bondage, subordination and domination by someone, and bearing humiliation under subjugation and power of others. I didn't write this. Right? This is from their own books. As stated, Dintuhum Fadanu means I subjugated them so they obeyed me. The obedient tribe is called the Qawmun Dainun, and here ad-din does not mean religion. So we're still not, after all these definitions, we're still not at deen meaning religion. It means obedience. The third meaning of Islam, the third level of meaning, is rules, regulations, ideology, doctrine, custom, tradition, or finally, under the third meaning, as the final entry, religion. And then finally, the fourth meaning is reward, repayment, justice, and accountability. So why is it that if you examine the Islamic texts, only 2, 3, 4, 5, at most 5% of the Islamic texts deal with what we in the West would term religion? The other 90%, 95% is international law, warfare, slavery, subjugation, commerce, politics, legal system. Why do we not look at those things? We only look at, well, it's religion like Christianity. No, it's not. No, it's not. Okay? So understand, we're missing all of these, and everyone goes, oh, it's religion. No, it's not. You're missing 20 other meanings that this word has. So understand, it is about subjugation and dominance. Let's return to the Crusades. Now, the show goes on to say that the Crusades were elicited by an appeal from the Roman Byzantine Emperor Alexius Comnenus, and that this had something to do with the Turks. The show is vague, deliberately vague. Exactly what the Turks have been doing? Well, the show doesn't really know, right? And you would then get the impression that the Turks had always been there, that they had not invaded that land. Okay? So the advent of the Turks represented a major surge in Islamic conquest, and this was, of course, played down, right? Because one must not offend Islam. Viewers of the show, let me just fix that little typo there, viewers of the show might notice a long gap between the Turks having to fend off the Crusaders and the Ottoman Turks eventually arriving at the gates of Vienna in 1683, for the second time, mind you. It was the second time, because the Crusades were critical in giving Europe 2 centuries or so of breathing room where Europe could get stronger and grow its armies, grow its economy, so that they could finally and ultimately resist the Islamic invasions that sought to make Europe into a caliphate and force everyone into Islam. So the Crusades bought Europe precious time. Of course, the show ignored the fall of Constantinople, right? And supposedly the ideology of jihad only exists because of the aggression of the Crusaders. And war in Islam, again, this little trope is only used for defense, and this is a complete lie. We're going to go into the Sharia, we're going to look at the only valid definition of jihad, which is the legal, or the Shari definition. So, I'm just going to skip ahead now, hence the dishonesty. So the impression that the show gives, and that Muslims want to give, is that when everyone heard the word of Allah, everyone spontaneously converted to Islam, and these Christian counterattacks were, in modern leftist terminology, imperial aggression. Now the only problem with the imperium here is that it is really resented, is that the wrong people were in charge. The wrong people had the power, right? So many shows that discuss the Crusades are just dishonest apologetics. They're propaganda. They're not history. So the Crusades were military expeditions during the Middle Ages conducted by European Catholics to defend Christian civilization, known as Christendom, from Islamic jihad. The Crusades developed as a result of the Christian world's long struggle with Islamic jihad. Islam's founder, Muhammad, formulated this concept of holy war, requiring Muslims to subjugate non-Muslims through warfare. So between AD 633 and 715, Arab armies conquered 2/3 of the Christian world, including Mesopotamia, Iraq, Syria, the Holy Land, Egypt, all of North Africa, as well as Spain. Through the 8th and 11th centuries, Christian lands were constantly invaded by Muslims. The Christians attempted to beat the Muslims back and recover territory that had been lost. Most of the fighting took place in border regions between Christian and Muslim worlds, especially Spain, Italy, and what we now call Turkey. Turkey was a Christian region known as Anatolia, ruled by Eastern Orthodox Byzantine Empire. And in the 10th century, a warlike people known as the Seljuk Turks converted to Islam, and they took power in the Muslim world. The Byzantines were defeated by the Turks in 1071 at the Battle of Manzikert, and they lost almost all of Anatolia. And the remaining remnant of the civilization that we today call Europe, right, was then called Christendom, right, before the discovery of the New, the remaining remnant of the civilization then called Christendom before the discovery of the New World is Europe. So, again, we've covered this, so what about the Crusades, right? 3/4 of the Christian world has been conquered. what remains of the Christian world prior to the New World is Europe. Islam is intent on taking that land. And small aside, there's a concept in Islam called waqf, endowment. Now, what this means is that if they've conquered territory in the name of Allah, it is Islamic in perpetuity till the end of time. If it is taken from them, it is their duty to go back and take that land again, because they need to reclaim it for the glory of Allah, for that little cinder block building you saw. So unfortunately, all land that they had once conquered is always permanently under threat. That's why Jerusalem is always permanently under threat. Okay. This is the wall at the Vatican. This wall is not there for show. This wall is there because there were two major invasions of this area, and there was massive destruction and warfare, and that's why the Vatican needed to build that wall. As you can see, it is a massive construction, right? Now, let's have a look at some European nations and territories that were attacked or came under Muslim occupation, often for centuries, hundreds of years. Now, these include, and this is not even a complete list, let's have a look. Muslims invaded Albania in the late 14th century, Armenia, Austria, Belarus, Bosnia-Herzegovina. They invaded Bulgaria. They invaded Crete. They invaded Cyprus. Muslims invaded Denmark. What they were doing in Denmark, who knows? If there's any Danish people in the group, please let me know if you guys are known for having invaded Saudi Arabia at any time in the last 1400 years. If there was any reason that Muslim armies went to Denmark because of anything you did to them since the 8th or 7th century. They invaded France. They invaded Georgia. They invaded Greece. They invaded Hungary. They invaded Iceland. They invaded Grindavik on the 20th of June and the 19th of July, 1627. Why? Well, because they like one booty, and by saying booty, I mean blonde women, as well as gold and possessions, and of course young children to become slaves. Right? They invaded Ireland. They ransacked the city of Baltimore in Ireland on the 20th of June 1631, made off with all the women, made off with all the children, killed all the men. Right? Have a look at that. They like them some blonde women, some attractive women. They invaded Israel. Right? They invaded Jerusalem in 637, 750, 970 to 983, and 1024 to 1077. Oh, by the way, if you've looked at the pinned comment, all the notes, everything I'm referring to is linked in the show notes, and you'll have access to everything that I'm discussing, so you'll have these notes to review and follow along. I'm currently in my OneNote database. Right, so look up the Crusades pages, the second page called Crusades. This is where I am at the moment, in the first table. They invaded Italy, Lithuania, Macedonia, Malta. Muslims invaded Poland. Now, I live in Poland, and I'm not aware of the Polish having invaded Saudi Arabia or Mecca at any time in the last 5 billion years. So what were the Muslims doing in Poland? Right? If Islam's a religion of peace and they would never attack anyone except out of defense, what were you doing in Poland? Right? They invaded Poland in 1669, 1671, and from 1672 to 1676. They invaded Portugal, Romania, Russia, Sardinia, Serbia, Sicily, Spain, and the Ukraine. And this is probably not a complete list. I've left out much of Asia. Okay? All of Asia, in fact. So, now, there are some links you can click here. You can go and find more, right? And you can download this PDF. Now, let's have a jihad. This is a jihad timeline from 630 to 1095. We're going to look at the religion of peace, being peaceful, using swords, killing people, murdering people, enslaving people, gathering sex slaves, and so on, peacefully, from the year 630. So Muhammad conquers Mecca from his base in Medina. He dies in Medina, 632. Islam controls the Hijaz. 636, there's the Muslim conquest of Syria, because, the Syrians obviously attacked them first. And they also conquer the surrounding lands, all Christian lands, including Palestine and Iraq. In 637, Muslim Crusaders conquer Iraq. In 638, Muslim Crusaders conquer and annex Jerusalem. Then they conquer Iran, except along the Caspian Sea. Then the Muslim Crusaders conquer Egypt. Then they finally seize control of Syria and Palestine fully. Then they conquer North Africa. Then by 650 they conquered Cyprus, Tripoli in North Africa, and they established Islamic rule in Iran, Afghanistan, and in Sindh, which I believe is India, Pakistan area. Then they begin to besiege Constantinople. The Dome of the Rock is completed in 691, only 6 decades after Muhammad's death. And you should be aware that Islam is the first religion to create a time machine, because you'll realize that Muhammad died supposedly in 632. Prior to his death, he traveled to the furthest mosque, supposedly the Dome of the Rock, tied up his horse, camel, donkey, flying unicorn thing, Burak, tied it to the mosque, and then from there left to heaven. Now, if the mosque was only built in 691, what Islamic mosque was there in the... So yes, as I said, in 710, Muslim Crusaders conquered the lower Indus Valley in India. Then they conquer Spain from 711 to 713, and they imposed the kingdom of Andalus. This is the supposed Islamic golden era. I should do a show about that. There was nothing golden about it. The Muslim conquest then moved into Europe from Spain. So by 718, the conquest of Spain was complete, and in 732, the Muslim invasion of France was stopped at the Battle of Poitiers, or the Battle of Tours. The Franks, under their leader Charles Martel, who was the grandfather of Charlemagne, defeated the Muslims and turned them out of France. In 762, Baghdad was founded in Iraq. In 785, the foundation of the Great Mosque of Cordoba, this would be in Spain. Then you have the rise of Idris ad-Damirs, the Muslim Crusaders in Morocco, and Christophorus, a Muslim who converted to Christianity, was executed because, as you know, Islam's a religion of peace. In 800, you have the Aghlabid dynasty or Muslim Crusaders in Tunisia. 807, so look, this just goes on and on. They conquer Sardinia, Italy. They start killing and attacking in 813 Christians in Palestine. Right, many who flee the country. Muslim Crusaders then capture Palermo, Italy, and they start raiding in southern Italy. They started within 100 kilometers of the coast. You wouldn't find women because they captured all of the attractive women, killed the men, took the boys, took the children, right? And they took the women back as sex slaves, of course. By the year 901, they've conquered Sicily, raided Corsica, invaded Italy, and still in France. Then, of course, you have multiple different caliphates that rise, and then so on and so on and so on. And eventually, 937, the Church of the Resurrection is burned down by Muslims. More churches in Jerusalem are attacked. Now you've got more of these Turks that convert, and so on. Israel and southern Syria again are conquered, and so on and so on and so on. Now, eventually, more and more oppressive decrees are levied against the Jews and the Christians who live within the Holy Land, and of course, people were traveling there to do their pilgrimages, and of course they were robbed because Muhammad, as we all know, was a caravan robber, right? Now, you've got all this up to 1071, Battle of Manzikert. Then you have 1073, Conquest of Jerusalem. 1075, the Seljuks capture Nicaea. You should note that if you look at the letters of the New Testament written by Paul and so on, they're all written to Christian churches, Christian lands. Of course, these are all Muslim now, right? So, yeah, all conquered. Now, eventually, in 1095, Pope Urban II preached the First Crusade, and in 1099, they recaptured Jerusalem. So you understand from all of this, there was a lot of Islamic violence. And this is something which is obviously very clear within the history, but Muslims want to lie and tell themselves and tell you Islam's religion of peace. So now, I'll pause for a moment. Are there any questions, Harry?
Guys, does anyone have a question? Please wave if you do. 1 second, right? Let's see if someone is waving. No one.
Okay.
I guess they are all in agreement.
Okay. Any comments from you, Harry? Any comments or thoughts from you?
No, I'm actually aware of those things, but I'm very happy that you are so detailed. This is so important, so important. Everything is true.
Okay, yeah, so I'm going to play about 3.5 minutes of video, so I want you to see this visually. I may interject at times, okay, but I'm going to play a few minutes of video so that you can see for yourself the Islamic conquest. Now, understand, the Crusades were, if you look at it, there were 12 Crusades, right? Some minor, some major, but let's say there were 12 major battles. Now, we're going to see 500, something like 548 major Islamic battles, which were fought to conquer Christendom. Okay, and you had 12 crusades to stop them. So if you divide 548 by 12, you will see that, well, according to Islamic maths, Christianity is violent and Islam didn't do nothing. Okay, so let's have a look here.
If you're see a lot of sunken ships. There was a lot of ships sailing around. When they go down, the economy goes down. So from this data, we know a lot. And this, in particular, the database of ancient documents, gives us 548 battles that Islam.
So I want you to note a couple of things that are important to note here. There were land trade routes from Europe to Asia, which the Muslims, eventually when they invaded those lands, they obviously, because Islam robs caravans, Muslims robbed caravans because Muhammad robbed caravans. They started robbing these caravans, and of course, because they seized North Africa, they cut off trade with North Africa and with Asia, right? So of course, Europe became impoverished, and this led to the Dark Ages. Now, this is something that's not discussed in history, right? Because there is a very large Islamic contribution to the Dark Ages and the impoverishment of Europe, right? Don't forget, they invaded Egypt, where papyrus came from, where paper came from. And because there was no papyrus, because there was no paper, well, Europeans, being the smart people they are, they invented what's called the printing press to compensate for the fact that the Muslims had destroyed all of their access to papyrus. Of course, Marco Polo had done his famous journeys, to the east, and of course this was no longer possible. So then European explorers decided, well, since we can't go east, we're going to have to go south down the sea route, and they discovered the sea route south, going to America and other places as well, thanks to Islam being such nasty pirates. Okay, let's continue.
Fought against the classical world. This is all new information. I've talked with people who consider themselves history buffs, and they go, well, let's see, battles of Islam against Europe. Let's see, we've got invasion, we have tours, we got the invasion of Gibraltar, we've got Lepanto, Gates of Vienna, collapse of... Okay, that's 5. You talk to a historian, and those are the 5 battles they can scratch up. And then I remind you, you can have all of these slides if you just send me an email for it. Okay, what does this new data show us? It shows us this. See the white spots? They're brand new battles. They're going to change to red.
Just give it a moment. He's talking. The map doesn't come up. It will come up in a moment. All right.
These are new. Every time, I want to show you this all over again. Every tick is 20 years. The new battles for that 20-year period come up in white. Then they fade to red to show you the history. So white's what's happening right now. Red has happened. Let's see how these 548 battles act out over. We're going to watch in 70 seconds, we're going to watch 1,200 years of conquest. Look how fast this is happening. Bam! Here comes, you didn't know France was hammered that hard, did you? You heard of Tours. Watch what's happening.
The speaker on this video is Bill Warner of CSPI, right? You're seeing how after the death of Muhammad, Muslims exploded out of Arabia and invaded and attacked everybody, everyone around them, without mercy, relentlessly, right? They were the Borg, right? Notice how many... Now, the French had nothing to do with Saudi Arabia at the time. There is no excuse for this, but Muslims are perpetually taught to be the victims. They cannot be wrong. If their deen is perfect, then they can do no wrong, right? So if you want to know more, you can look on YouTube for Bill Warner, and it's called Why We Are Afraid. Look that up and you'll find more, a 45-minute long discussion on this.
Happening in Spain and the islands. Now, many of these raids or battles, if they're at the coastline, are slave raids. The slaving that took place in here was extensive and went on and on. All of this work is also happening now then. We're now into the golden age of Baghdad. This is the punishment that's being handed out to Christians everywhere. In Spain, after one battle, there were knights' heads were cut off, and they made a pile so high that a man on horseback couldn't see over them. All of the European civilization in North Africa is now gone.
So you can see within Asia, right, they have wiped out whatever other religions existed, as well as in North Africa. They've completely taken that over.
Now, pretty soon, and by the way, there will be a period of time, and you can see the clock running up here, there will be a brief blip of 5 battles that occur in North Africa, the Barbary Pirate Wars. We're on there. Okay? Now then,
let me note here that Islam considers everything that came before it to be part of the time of ignorance prior to the advent of Islam, the time of what they call the Jahiliyyah, right? So if you worship a different, well, that's, I'd have to get into the Sharia. I'm not going to jump into that right now to show you the legal understanding from Islam, the orthodox understanding, the consensus by all the schools of Islam as to what they view Christianity and Judaism and other religions. But short version, all other religions are abrogated, replaced by Islam, and we are violating the will of Allah by not abandoning our religions and praying as the Muslims do behind Muhammad, right? So this is all, so they need to convert all of this from the lands of ignorance to the glory of Islam, so you too can go and worship a cinder block once a year.
Byzantium has fallen. Now then, Eastern Europe is being hammered. Notice that it is relentless. It doesn't stop. This is the history that you're never told about. This is the history that explains how all of this came about. Now then, they're getting slower because Islam is becoming weaker. Corruption. All empires collapse from the inside ultimately. Okay. I say that what caused the collapse of classical civilization was not the invading German barbarian tribes. I say that classical civilization was destroyed by Islam.
Okay, now it should be noted that Islamic countries do not produce anything. They were like parasites when they were invading. They would take over a country, they would co-opt its technology, co-opt its industry, co-opt its production, because according to their law, the non-Muslims must pay jizya. They have to work, and then it's not a tax. The jizya is not a tax. It is retribution. It is punishment because you do not become a Muslim. It is punishment because you do not proselytize with them by warfare to spread Islam. And they would simply suck these economies dry. They did not produce, and thus they eventually collapsed, right? So now, in the 7th century, Muslims invaded and took control of Jerusalem. In the 11th century, they began to hassle, to kill and molest Christian pilgrims near Jerusalem. The Muslim Turks even attacked Rome and Belgrade in 1456. So the Crusades were in response to cries of help from the Eastern Byzantine Empire, which worried about the military threat of the Seljuk Turks. If the Christians did not respond, Muslims would have conquered all of Europe, and they would have wiped Christianity from the planet. So the Islamic high water mark in Europe ended when they were defeated at Vienna on September the 11th, 1683. A small aside on this. The reason that this date was chosen, all conspiracy theories aside, this is the day, the final day in history where Islam was control of Europe was within Islam's grasp on September the 11th. And then the Polish army under King Jan Sobieski arrived in Vienna. And he looked at the army from the Kallenberg and he said, "This man is badly encamped. He knows nothing of war. Surely we will defeat him." At 4 a.m. on September the 12th, he went to war and he shattered the Turkish army. So Osama bin Laden wanted to roll back the clock to September the 11th, the symbolic date when Islam was dominant in Europe and dominant in the Christian world. So that's why September the 11th was chosen. Now, in AD 1009, Caliph Hakim of Egypt ordered the destruction of the Holy Sepulchre and all Christian places of worship in Jerusalem. Christians were persecuted, pilgrims were attacked. So now let's look at Pope Urban II and his speech to Christians from this Crusader era. "Your brethren who live in the East are in urgent need of your help, and you must hasten to give them the aid which has often been promised to them. For as most of you have heard, the Turks and Arabs have attacked them and have conquered the territory of Romania, the Greek Empire, as far west as the shore of the Mediterranean and the Hellespont, which is called the Arm of St. George. They've occupied more and more of the lands of those Christians and have overcome them in 7 battles. They have killed and captured many and have destroyed the churches and devastated the empire. If you permit them to continue thus for a while with impunity, the faithful of God will be much more widely attacked by them. On this account, I, rather the Lord, beseech you as Christ's heralds, to publish this everywhere and to persuade people, whatever rank, foot soldiers and knights, poor and rich, to carry aid promptly to those Christians and to destroy that vile race from the lands of our friends. Right. So this was the plea written by Pope Urban. Of course, the church debated this for a long time. Don't forget, the church debated this whole response for 463 years. Their response was, in many ways, too little, too late. Right? 463 years later, the church said, okay, well, maybe we need to fight back. Right? Now, I'm going to do an aside. I'm going to jump across to something else. I want to go to, this is a book on Islamic international law. This is called the Kitab al-Siyar al-Sagir. It's called Muslim International Law. I'll zoom in here. Muslim International Law, because remember, the Ummah is a nation, the nation of Islam, and I'm not talking about Louis Farrakhan, right? Muslim International Law, they view themselves as a superstate above all states. Your loyalty is to the Ummah of Islam before any nationality. The Kitab al-Siyar, Siyar is war. This means war, the wars of the Prophet. Now the term Siyar comes from Sira, right? We know it as the biographies of Muhammad. These would be the biographies of Muhammad. Also, you can think of them as the Gospels of Muhammad to compete with those of Jesus. Now, let's step forward here. So, about this book, this is very important here. Let me just go here. These PDFs are being a little finicky with me. So, this is a project of the Pakistani government who, as you know, are Muslim because they're the Islamic, government, the Islamic Republic. And of course, they want to obviously spread Islamic law, and you know that they are the country where Christians are constantly persecuted and killed for blasphemy, jailed for blasphemy, and so on. So this is one of the 100 most important books of Islamic thought, culture, and civilization. They want to publish works which laid the foundation of a new faith come knowledge-based civilization. And so they want books of the first intensity, books that have mattered in the advancement of knowledge. And this book happens to be one of those. The shorter book, now this is a summary of the longer book, but this is the book on Muslim international law. So let's have a look at Islamic foreign policy. And Islamic foreign policy, let me see, chapter 1 on the shorter book on Muslim international law. Let's see, chapter 1 of Islamic diplomacy and dealing with foreigners is instructions of Muhammad about the conduct of war. There you go. The very first chapter, chapter 1 on Islamic international law is go over there, kill those people. Islamic international law. I didn't make the book, I didn't write the book. Hey, I just read the translation. Section, prohibition of warlike operations during the sacred months has been abrogated. In other words, when Muslims come to and say, no, but jihad, blah, 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 nonsense. It states here very clearly. Right. Yes.
Can we take a question for a second?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Ali, if you have a question, you can go ahead. Ali?
Okay. Thank you so much for the
welcome.
opportunity to provide it. Hello there, Mr. Lloyd.
Hi there.
The Jongh. I appreciate the time you dedicated to conduct such great research regarding the history of Islam. I got a question that these actually walk through over the history of Islam from the beginning to the present time. Is considering actually the all tribes or all different affiliations of Islam. You mean I gotta say that I haven't checked the veracity of all the references that Mr. Goldenoff presented regarding.
Do you have a question,
representation.
or are you trying to smear the work because you don't have anything to add?
Actually, our question is about the affiliation of the Muslims that you're actually walking us through them. Different invasions, different wars.
What is your question, please?
For example, the invasion to the different countries in Europe. You said Poland, France.
You mean those were not real
Um,
Muslims? They were not real Muslims that were doing all this because they were doing Islam wrong?
Definitely, they are labeled as Muslims.
So in other words, just like
Definitely.
communists are all about, no, that wasn't real socialism, Muslims, oh, that's not real Islam. So do me a favor, you belong to one of the 4 major schools of jurisprudence in Islam, correct? Or did you suddenly just become a Quran-only Muslim? Because that's a very common dodge. Which school of jurisprudence do you belong to?
Actually, I was born a Muslim, and the Muslim actually, if you for information, has 73 approximately. I'm not sure of the exact number.
Okay, look, so you're wasting my
73
time here.
different
Please forgive me, you're wasting my time here. There are 4 major schools of Islamic jurisprudence. All the rest are considered to be effectively apostate. They are not to be regarded as taken seriously. There are only 4 canonical, 4 respected, 4 authoritative schools of jurisprudence. Okay, there's the Jafari school in Shia Islam, which is actually recognized by the Sunnis. Then you've got the Hanafi, the Hanbali, the Maliki, and the Shafi. Those are founded by what is called the Mujtahids Mutlaq. The Mujtahids Mutlaq mean the absolute scholars, the perfect scholars, the infallible scholars of Islam who know everything and cannot make a mistake, because it does say in your Quran and therefore in your Sharia and therefore in your fiqh, which is the application of all things Islam, that the Muslims can never make a mistake, because the hand of Allah is over the Muslims. They're all Muslims. Now, you as a mukallaf, who is not someone who is a mujtahid, who cannot therefore make any kind of fatwa, you are simply a follower. Okay, you're a mukallaf. You are under the authority of Allah, and you must find yourself a scholar, right? And you have to serve in terms of what's called taqlid. Okay, so you need to follow a scholar, because the scholars are the inheritors of the authority of Muhammad, right? So you are just at the you are at the ibadah level of understanding, so you are not in a position to discuss any of this. So now what I want you to do is you tell me which school of jurisprudence you belong to, because only these 4 are recognized. Then these scholars, all of them agree. Now I want you to tell me which school you belong to, which Sharia manual is the prime one within your school, and give me the legal definition of jihad from your prime Sharia manual. Give me the legal definition of jihad. Also, you are claiming these are not real Muslims. You know that you are now pronouncing takfir on these Muslims. You have no right to pronounce takfir, because any Muslim can commit any crime, no matter how heinous, but as long as he believes in Muhammad, believes in Allah, believes in the last day, said the Shahada, he is a Muslim no matter what. So you don't know your own doctrine. I know this stuff extremely well. You have no idea how well I know this. Okay, so either you start talking detailed specifics, or you are wasting my time.
Sorry to interrupt you, but your information, the Taliban are currently in Afghanistan are true Muslims.
They are 100% Sharia compliant. Show me.
It's like the ancestors.
So the Taliban
I do know what you're talking about.
The Taliban are 100% correct in their application, because let me explain to the entire audience. There is no such thing as Islamism. There's no such thing as a moderate Muslim. There's no such thing as a radical Muslim. Islam has doctrines, multiple doctrines. So you have the doctrine of azima, which is strictness, which is the strict application of Islam. It is, as is defined within Islam, doing a thing as it must be done. This is strictness, called azima. Then you have rukhsa. Now within Islam, this is called dispensation, basically a loosening of the rules, because they realize not everyone is capable of being that strict. So a small minority of Muslims is required by law to always pursue Islam as strictly as possible. The Taliban have taken it upon themselves to pursue azima, strictness. So has ISIS. The only place where the Taliban and ISIS violate the Sharia, okay, The only place where they violate the Sharia, and you need to show me your Sharia laws. I'm not going to listen to your opinion. I am not interested in your opinion. I want to see your mujtahids. I want to see the fiqh, right? The only place where they violate the Sharia is that they've abandoned or abolished rukhsa, dispensation, the relaxation of the Islamic rules early, before the caliphate was established worldwide. That is the only violation of the Sharia that they have performed. Otherwise, they are 100% following the Sharia of Islam to the letter. They are the perfect Muslims. Okay, so look, do me a favor, please, Harry, if you can let's just move on, because there was no question and there was just waffle. Hopefully this is clarified.
Yes. I'm sorry. Yeah, please go on.
Okay, really. So, understand, the next item is the army's treatment of the disbelievers and in the acquisition of Muslim property earlier taken away by non-Muslims. Now, when they say Muslim property, it's like, they've taken your property, you take it back, they have to go and take it back again. But understand, these are the first 3 rules of Islamic international policy. Make war, okay? Understand there is no restriction on the warfare and how to deal with the kafir slaves and prisoners. Let's go on. Okay, so, yeah, let me see if there's something that I missed there that I wanted to add. There's that. Oh, let's have a look quickly at this definition. This is taken from what is called the Encyclopedia of Islam. This is the gold standard of Islamic research. And Muslims will say, yeah, but it wasn't written by Muslims. Yes, it is. If you read through the authorship of this is an international thing. It is in use in Islamic universities around the world. This is the gold standard of Islamic understanding worldwide. To buy a set of this stuff will cost you $30,000, $40,000. To rent it is like $4,000 a year to rent this darn thing. Okay? Siyar, in jurisprudence, the area concerned with the rules of war and the dealings with non-Muslims. And they also have a concept called siyasa, quite interesting. The violence that the ruler of Islam has to use to preserve his authority. So, in other words, they have a name. It's called statecraft, but statecraft through violence. So, in other words, Islam is both violent and it is totalitarian. And they mention here governance in accordance with the Sharia. So, siyasa sharia. Governance, rulership in accordance with the Sharia, a Sunni doctrine calling for the harmonization between the fiqh and siyasa. So in other words, the fiqh must comply with the violence with which Islam uses to govern. Okay, the links again to all of this is in the show notes. Okay, I'm now going to move on. Any comments from you, Harry, before I move on?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a small comment. When you showed the map of the different attacks, it was very interesting to see the amount of attacks in the Spanish, in Spain.
Yep.
And they always say that it was a golden time of peace and innovation and all the rest of it. But
when you say
times,
peace, do you mean as in peace? Yes, exactly. When you say peace, do you mean P-I-S-S, or do you mean?
Yes, but just see the amount of times the people who actually lived there resisted and battled the imperialistic Islam.
Correct.
It's incredible, the dots number.
Yeah. No, exactly. This, and by now they've probably uncovered more of these battles, more of this kind of violence and warfare. But understand, what were they doing in Hungary? Well, did the Hungarians attack Mecca first that we don't know about? That the Muslims were defending themselves from the Hungarians, from the Danish, from the Poles? Like, seriously.
Iceland.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You know? So, yeah. Now, I'm going to make a quick aside because I do intend to discuss this topic probably next week. Okay, we're going to talk about slavery for a minute. Now, understand that Muslims and others, leftists, and no, I'm not a leftist. They always go on about the Atlantic slave trade. Now, the Atlantic slave trade was the trade basically from Africa to North America, which includes Canada. So, America as we know it today, and Canada. So, between 350,000 and 500,000 slaves, black slaves, were taken from Africa to North America. So, you're looking at 350K to 500,000. Of course, these numbers always somehow forget to include that the nice brown people who live in South America, those brown people, because facts are racist, that the nice brown people took 14.5 million slaves to South America. So in other words, they took something like 30 times more slaves to South America, then went to North America, but somehow we're focusing on that little bit of slaves that, numerically speaking, statistically speaking, went to North America. We forget the 14.5 million slaves that went south. Why is that? Why is that? Maybe it must be a propaganda campaign against white people, Christians, the West in general. Now, okay, it is little known that at least a minimum of 1.5 million slaves were taken by these Africans and Muslims, these black people, these brown people, were taken from Europe to Africa as slaves. So now you've got something between 3 and 6 times as many slaves were taken from Europe to Africa as slaves and as sex slaves than were taken from Africa to America. Where's the outrage? Okay, I would like to see these Islamic apologists cancel themselves over this fact. Okay, so between the 15th and the 18th centuries alone, approximately 5 million Europeans were abducted and enslaved in the name of jihad. We do not know exactly how many were kidnapped during the great Arab slave raids on Europe between the poorly documented 8th and 11th centuries. Why are they poorly documented? Because the Arabs burned everything. So the largest Islamic army ever to invade European territory, which is anything up to 300,000, these numbers vary depending on which historical source you read, some 225,000 martyrdom-seeking jihadis came as late as 1683 to conquer Vienna and then Rome, because once they'd conquered Vienna, their intent was to take Rome. They were going to stable their horses in St. Paul's in Rome. That was the plan. Of course, they were stopped by the Polish king, Jan III Sobieski. So, even as the Ottoman Empire was beginning its slow retreat from Eastern Europe, the Muslim slavers of the so-called Barbary states of North Africa were wreaking havoc all along the coasts of Europe, reaching as far as Iceland. So the era of piracy was instituted and started by the Muslims, because it's Islam. It's always Islam. Let's have a look. These are a couple of books. Now, there are many that you can find. There are many historical references. And again, it's interesting that this is not discussed more, because white people bad, black people good somehow. Islam is always good because historians are scared of. They're scared of getting killed by the people of the religion of peace if they say bad things about it. Okay? Because you have nothing to fear from Islam, because it's religion of peace, and if you say otherwise, they will kill you, as we all know. So, Tripoli, the United States' first war on terror. The United States of America's first war, which it fought before it could even elect its first president, was against Islamic slavers, because the Islamic slavers were raiding American ships. They were taking people, taking hostages, taking all of the booty, all the bounty that was on these ships, and they were ransoming people. And they eventually signed an agreement. I think America was paying something like 20% of its gross national product to Muslim slavers, right, to these Islamic slavers as a bounty. This jizya, right, this retribution, this punishment was being paid, which was crippling the United States economy. They couldn't grow, and they decided, we need to form a navy, and we need to form the Marines, and we need to go over there and kick their asses. So, when Thomas Jefferson and John Adams asked the Barbary ambassador why his countrymen were enslaving American sailors, the ambassador answered us that it was founded on the laws of their prophet, that it was written in their Quran, that it was their right and duty to make war upon them, the non-Muslims, wherever they could be found, and to make slaves of all they could take as prisoners. Now, here are 3 books. Thomas Jefferson and the Tripoli Pirates, The Forgotten War That Changed American History. Jefferson's War, America's First War on Terror, 1801 to 1805, and To the Shores of Tripoli, the birth of the U.S. Navy and the Marines. The U.S. was forced, as a new impoverished country, just come out of revolution, came out of the war with Britain, to form a navy, create the Marines. They invaded Tripoli. That's why the Marine song, the theme, has the line, To the Shores of Tripoli, because they had to go fight Islam. Their first war, once they became an independent country, was against Islamic slave traders. So, now what we saw in the earlier video, right, what we today call the West, is merely the westernmost remnant of what was once a much more extensive civilization that Islam permanently severed. Centuries of non-stop jihad and terror saw 3/4 of the post-Roman Christian world become Islamic, leaving the remaining quarter, which is Europe today, in a permanent state of siege since the 700s. Islam has a couple of sayings that people in the West are not aware of, right? They say, You have the clocks, but we have the time, right? And they've got another saying which very few people know. It's crazy. No one knows this. No one's heard it, right? I learned this by accident one day. But they say, do not let your enemy know he's your enemy. So in the West, we say, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But in Islam, they say, do not let your enemy know he is your enemy. Very different way of thinking. And also, again, another aside, people always, and again, we should talk about this in the future when I speak about jihad. Everyone always talks about, oh, but the Mossad says by way of deception, you will do war. Oh my God, Mossad is evil. Look, whatever. However, Muhammad in the Quran says deception, okay? He speaks of deception. He says war is a game of deception. That's in the older translations. The newer translation says, just say war is deception. Okay, in the older translations, go back to the 1600s, Islam says that warfare is a game of deception. This is hundreds of years before Mossad. But you know what? It's not okay when the Jews say it, but it's perfectly fine hypocrisy when the Muslims do it. Okay, so understand they've been doing this for a long time. So Raymond Ibrahim, very good scholar, excellent, Egyptian, right? Speaks perfect Arabic, of course, and is American Egyptian. Sword and Scimitar, one of the best books on the subject. So for this reason, a tiny Europe's self-identity did not historically revolve around ethnicity or language. This corner of the Eurasian landmass, Europe, houses dozens of languages as well as ethnicities. Many are divergent, while much larger landmasses are homogeneous. Think China, right? Japan. Europe's identity evolved from a common religion. It was the last and the most formidable bastion of Christendom, which was not then conquered by military force by Islam. Right? Understand, this is Europe relative to just, right, this is what we have in terms of Europe, right? There's not a lot left. And if you consider all of Africa they've taken, Asia, there's not a lot left of Europe. This is Europe. This is all that's left. And yeah, well, the question is, do you want to be bowing to the, to Allah, or do you want to maintain your culture and civilization? Okay, so we're about 3/4 of the way, 70% of the way. So in 1993, Samuel Huntington said in his book, The Clash of Civilizations, that Islam is bloody borders. In Eurasia, now again, when I talk about jihad, I will discuss this, okay? And I will show you some references now to give you an insight into this. But in Eurasia, the great historical fault lines between civilizations are once more aflame. This is particularly true along the boundaries of the crescent-shaped Islamic bloc of nations, from the bulge of Africa to Asia. Violence also occurs between Muslims on the one hand and Orthodox Serbs in the Balkans, Jews in Israel, Hindus in India, Buddhists in Burma, and Catholics in the Philippines. Islam has bloody borders. In other words, Islam, wherever it goes, ends up fighting with everyone around it. Historian Bernard Lewis wrote, for almost 1,000 years from the first Moorish landing in Spain, 711, notice they say Moorish, he doesn't say Muslim, because euphemisms abound because nobody wants to offend Islam, right? Again, I need to discuss this in a different time when I speak about Islamic deception, but Islamophobia and such, and these accusations are based upon the Islamic laws of slander. In fact, there are two sets of laws that work together here. The one is called slander, called ghibba, and the other one is called tale-bearing, namima. So in Western law, slander is when I tell a lie about you, right? I besmirch your name, I smear your name with lies. In Islam, yes, that can certainly be the case. However, there's another element in terms of slander that we wouldn't consider within the West, but is practiced and is normal within Islam. If I tell the truth about you and you don't like it, that is slander. For me to tell something about you that is true, that is embarrassing to you, is considered slander. Okay? The truth that you would dislike in Islam is considered slander. It's called the law of ghibba, and I can cover that another time. So, anyway, so therefore you cannot tell the truth. That's why you have to euphemize everything, right? So, to the second Turkish siege of Vienna, Europe was under constant threat from Islam. All but the easternmost provinces of the Islamic realm had been taken from Christian rulers. North Africa, Egypt, Syria, right? Even Persian-ruled Iraq had been Christian countries in which Christianity was older and more deeply rooted than in most of Europe. Okay? Now, their loss was sorely felt and heightened the fear that a similar fate was in store for Europe, as wave after wave of Islamic attacks crashed against the continent. After Europe neutralized Islam, it forgot all about its ancient antagonist. All right. Now, someone asked about where you can find more of my content. Again, check in the OneNote database link. You'll find my YouTube channel. Otherwise, just search for my name on YouTube, right? Lloyd de Jongh. Just search for me and you'll find me very easily. So just search for my full name. So, as historian Hilaire Belloc observed, during the peak of Western might and Muslim weakness, millions of people of the white civilization, that is the civilization of Europe and America, have forgotten about Islam. They've never come into contact with it. They take for granted that it is decaying and that anyway it's just a foreign religion which will not concern them. It is, as a fact, the most formidable and persistent enemy which our civilization has had, and may at any moment become as large a menace in the future as it has been in the past. So today this forgetting has been, shall we say, institutionalized. It is taught, it is deliberate. Notice that supposedly objective history books don't talk about Muslims and Islam and jihad. They speak of Arabs, Moorish, Ottoman, Tatar. Rarely do they mention Islamic invasions. They fail to mention the doctrine of jihad that created this warfare on Christianity. So, a reported 215 million Christians are experiencing high levels of persecution. In fact, it has been declared a genocide in the Muslim world, right? So, you have progressive ideologies that fail to understand Islam, and I'm going to go into the Sharia next so you can see explicitly what Islamic law, this Sharia that they want to impose on the rest of the world, right? What it teaches, what the law is. So you have the Quran and the Sunnah being the Seerah of Muhammad, the Gospels of Muhammad, as well as these hadiths, right? And other sources like the Tafsir, which are the commentaries and various other types of commentaries. All of this is very confusing because things have been abrogated, things have been cancelled, etc. And things are contradictory. All of this has been sorted out, harmonized, and all of what remains is called the Sharia. All of the rulings of and the actions and the prohibitions and so on of Muhammad and Allah that remain after all of this is called the Sharia. These are the eternal moral laws of Islam. How to apply all this within Islam, how to apply this in the legal, social, financial, and so on contexts, that's called the fiqh, right? That is the law. So, we're going to have a look at that in a moment. Now, to end off on this particular set of slides, so the obvious reason to, what about the Crusades? The question is, what about them? They were necessary. They were critical. Okay? Muslims invaded dozens of countries long before any country had invaded them. Right? They were committed to the use of force to expand Islam from the beginning. So, now violence committed in the name of other religions is logically unconnected to the question of whether Islam is violent. Okay? So, what people hope to do is they hope to embarrass, to use shame to stop people from claiming that Islam is violent. It will use any tool in its arsenal. So, understand, right? So, I'll stop here. I'll just jump over a few things. Okay? Now, Christianity does not legislate law. Right? Christianity does not legislate law. The Bible doesn't legislate parking tickets. Right? The Bible doesn't legislate how you sell movie tickets. Right? So whereas Islam is a religion of law, and how that law is expressed, we can go to its law books, because if it's a religion of law, we should be able to read its laws. Okay? So I'm going to jump over a few things here, and let me see. So I'm going to introduce this, which is one of the major Islamic Sharia texts. This is the largest one. It's 4 volumes, 2,652 pages at least. When you study to be an imam or a sheikh or something at Islamic seminary, in Islamic university, this is the final volume that you will learn because it is the most detailed one on Islamic law. Understand that no one Islamic Sharia manual covers everything. Different manuals have a focus on different issues and they go into detail on different subjects. So you need to have multiple manuals, and often there's a scholar that is regarded as preeminent in a given field. So other scholars will reference those works or that scholar's works to get the consensus view, the most authoritative view when applying their judgments. So this one is called Siyar. Okay, this is from the Hidayah. Okay, it's a Hanafi school of fiqh. It's the Hidayah, and this one is the most detailed discussion of Islamic warfare. Sayyir is the plural of sirat, which in its primitive sense signifies regulation. in matters of spiritual and temporal. Siyar in the language of the law especially applies to the institutes of the Prophet in his warfare. Introductory. So let's have a look at this on the manner of waging war, of plunder and the division thereof, and of the conquest of infidels. So this is law, and it lays this out in about 100 and something pages, so you can read page after page of rules. It says here, war must be carried on against the infidels at all times by some party of the Muslims. Remember when they say it's a small minority? Well, that small minority is, according to the law, required because they are following azima, not rukhsa. They are strict Muslims. The rest are following azima. Of course, those Muslims following rukhsa, the dispensation, the loose form of affiliation where you can abandon some of the rules of Islam, they can switch over to azima, to strictness, at any time, given requirements and rules set out within the Sharia. The sacred injunction concerning war is sufficiently observed when it is carried on by any one party or tribe of Muslims, and it is then no longer of any force with respect to the rest. In other words, as long as that small minority is out there killing you by stabbing you with a knife on London Bridge, as long as they're busy doing that, or blowing up your concert in London, or driving through your Christmas market in Germany, as long as someone is doing that, the rest are exempt. It is established as a divine ordinance by the word of Allah, who has said in the Quran, slay the infidels, and also by a saying of the Prophet, war is permanently established until the day of judgment, meaning the ordinance respecting war. War is enjoined, means it is commanded for the purpose of advancing Islam. Okay? And they say here, they speak of ordained war to be waged against infidels. It is termed the Holy War. It does tell us that if no Muslims were to make war, the whole of the Muslims, the entire Ummah, would incur the criminality of neglecting to make war. In other words, they would all go to hell. Their souls would be forfeit because they are not performing holy jihad. It says here, the destruction of the sword is incurred by infidels, although they be not the first aggressors, as appears from the various passages in the sacred writings, which are generally received to this effect. And it says here in the sidebar, infidels may be attacked without provocation. Now, this is a Hanafi book of fiqh. Now, you've got the four schools of Islamic jurisprudence. They are not separate religions. They are all one religion because, again, according to the statements of the scholars, according to the Sharia, Allah will not allow the Muslims to agree upon an error. Right? So where they do disagree within the fiqh, those are just on cosmetic issues. Those are on minor issues that do not affect fundamental doctrine. So 75-80% of the fiqh is identical. So whether you worship with your hands up here, or whether you worship with your hands down here, that is merely cosmetic. That is where they differ. Those are minor issues which has no bearing on the practice of Islam and the understanding and application of it. Right? So this is common to all of the schools. Right, so now I'm going to jump across to the Sharia, and we're going to have a look through some of these notes. So let's have a look here. Let me see, I've covered this definition, I've covered this one. So let's have a look. Let's do some more detail here within the Hidayah. Okay, so we're going to look a bit deeper into the Hidayah. So I'm currently on page 154 within the Hidayah. So now I'm going to jump to page 158, and we're going to do a few pages so you can see from within Islamic law why they were guilty of the crusade. Well, why they were guilty of invading every land that they possibly could. This is not an in-depth, full-depth discussion. I will do that another time when I talk about jihad. We're going to answer every question you've ever thought you had, and we're going to go in more depth than you knew there was. But for now, we just want to get an overview. Infidels must be called to the faith previous to making war upon them. That's in the sidebar here. Then it goes on to say, the Prophet Muhammad instructed his commanders to call the infidels to the faith, because the people will hence perceive that they are attacked for the sake of religion and not for the sake of taking their property. So Muslims must attack you for the sake of religion, and on this consideration it is possible that they may be induced to agree to the call in order to save themselves from the troubles of war. So they need to frighten you into just giving up. Now, notice they say here that they must call you to the faith. Now, of course, later on, as you read every single Islamic injunction, and I mean every single one, without exception, has an out clause, has a but attached to it. So they'll say you must never slander the name of Allah under any circumstances, no matter what, except if you're forced to because you need to pretend to be a Christian, or because you don't want to come across as a jihadi and you want to allay suspicion. So if you need to do it, go ahead and do it. It's not a problem, but don't ever do it. But except anytime you need to, it's fine. Every single law in Islam, without exception, can be broken, can be negated, can be twisted any way you like. It is entirely legal. But that's a discussion for another day, right? If a Muslim attacks infidels without previously calling them to the faith, he is an offender. So hey, so don't call them to the faith and then attack them if they say no. So if you do this, right, attacking them without calling them to join Islam, you're an offender because this is forbidden. But, here's the famous but. If he does attack them before inviting them and he kills them and he takes their property, there is no fine, there is no expiation, there is no atonement. He has done no wrong. There is no sin, no guilt, no legal penalty whatsoever. So Muslims will tell you, but they must follow, but nonsense. They don't have to follow any rules. Every rule has a negation. Every single rule without exception. There is not one single thing that is entirely, totally, completely sacrosanct in Islam. Not a single thing. So, because that which protects the infidels, the kafir, that's you, that which protects the non-Muslim, namely Islam, does not exist in them. So therefore, because you're not a Muslim, it's okay to kill you. Then they'll say, but hold on, don't kill women and children. Don't kill, we are wow, hey, there's an exception to that too. Two exceptions, in fact. In the same manner as the slaying of women or infant children of infidels is forbidden, but, the famous but, if a person were to slay them, he is not liable to a fine. Hey, you killed 12 3-month-old children and a bunch of defenseless women. Do I have to pay a fine? No. And why do they not pay a fine? Because, well, if Muslims were required to fight and there were going to be penalties upon them, this would inhibit them from going to do Allah's work, which was to slaughter you. And if they were to be inhibited, they would be guilty of the sin of non-performance, which would obviously be a crime, as we saw earlier. So therefore, if you need to kill the women and kill the babies, well, you're going to have to, because it's okay, don't worry about it. This is Islamic law, understand? And it is the most, excuse my French, it's the most filthy thing you will ever read in your life. The Prophet plundered and despoiled the tribe of Muslik by surprise. So in other words, he didn't call them, he plundered them by surprise. So in other words, you should give them warning. You should say, hey, come to Islam, but this is not incumbent, because Muhammad didn't do it either, okay? And so he made a predatory attack upon Qobna at an early hour and then set their village on fire. And such attacks are not preceded by a call. So you must invite them to Islam before you attack, except when you attack them without inviting them, in which case you can kill them at any hour, murder them, and then burn them. That's okay. So in other words, 1 + 1 is equal to 2. It's also equal to 5, 7, 9, and any number you need it to be at that time. If the infidels, upon receiving the call, neither consent to it nor agree to pay the jizya, the capitation tax, it is incumbent upon the Muslims to call upon Allah for assistance and to make war upon you. Because Allah is the assistant of those who serve Him and the destroyer of His enemies, the infidels. Who's the infidel? You. Who's Allah's enemy? You. So that is very, very interesting. So 159. So now I'm going to jump across to 160. We'll go to 160. And remember, this is all sanctified by the law. All of this. Breaking of every single rule of war that Muslims will say, don't burn trees. That's a lie, because you will find that they have rules that say, well, do not burn the trees. That's wrong. Except if you need to burn the trees. Then don't worry about it. Just burn the trees. Understand? This is the constant. They can even kill their own people. They're allowed to kill their own in the process of making war. They're forgiven for that too. So now I'm going to go to the last page here, 168, and in the Hidayah, we're just going to finish up on this. You need to understand this. Now, they'll say that, look, a single Muslim should not go out and make war upon you because there's no caliph. There is no caliphate. Therefore, he's not empowered by the caliph to take action, except when there's no caliph, in which case the Muslim has to take action because there's no caliph. So the caliph has to give permission to the Muslim to go and make individual lone wolf jihad. That's why there are these packs of lone wolves out there in Europe and America and so on, or have been. So there needs to be a caliph to call this, except when there's no caliph, in which case Muslims must take it upon themselves. So you see, there must be a caliph to do this, so they aren't real Muslims, except they're real Muslims because they have to do it on their own if there's no caliph. Any single Muslim is empowered to make war upon the infidels, wherefore they fear him. You are meant to fear the Muslims. You are meant to fear them. The object of fear is the object to which to look for protection, and a single Muslim is the object of fear. I hope this makes clear. I'm going to pause here for a moment before I go on. I'll be ending with another Sharia reference to back up and add to some of this. Harry, any questions or comments or thoughts?
Yes, I have one question here. He's asking how Muslims, after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, managed to conquer the empire of Iran, and what happened to the Zarathustrian religion?
They were in a conflict with the Christian lands, the Romans. No, they were in conflict with the Romans for centuries, for a long time, or decades. There was a long, long war, and they were exhausted from that war. And into that vacuum of power, because of the weakness of the warfare against the Romans, the Muslims took advantage of that gap.
I see. 2 points that I want to make, just to clarify, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the biggest Shia center of the Muslim world was actually in Egypt, under the Fatimas, right? It wasn't.
I can't remember, to be honest.
Okay, and you mentioned the Philippines, so I just want to mention Abu Sayyaf. They're also very peaceful.
Of course.
It's an organization in Mindanao that likes to cut heads, and
they're affiliates of ISIS. Don't forget, ISIS is 100% Sharia compliant. They follow these rules that I'm reading here. They follow these books to the letter. You'll find these books in their libraries. They follow these rules. This is Islam. So in other words, once they have control of an area, they are supposed to finally, ultimately, eventually, implement Sharia fully. This is full Sharia. Currently, you do not have the full implementation of Sharia except under ISIS and under the Taliban.
I understand. Are there any questions? Anyone wants to ask a question, please? Please wave if you do.
Forgive me if I'm not very PC. I am from Africa. I attended a school for emotionally disturbed teachers, which has affected my education and outlook.
No, I don't see any question, but I just want for you to clarify something.
Sure.
Like during the so-called Islamic Golden Age, basically all the people there were like under a reign of terror, non-stop terror. Can you talk a bit more about the life of people during these times?
Look, I've been collecting notes on that because I'm actually busy going through some of the latest research on that subject. So, very short version. For instance, if you look in what's the name of the place that has a G in it? Granada. So during this peaceful time, don't forget that within the Sharia, I'll give you one example. Because again, I hate to talk about a subject when I have not researched it and I don't have my notes and references in front of me. Every reference that I'm using, I've given to everyone here who can read it themselves, and they can look at it and see if I'm just making this up or not. But so I don't have any notes in front of me right now. I have notes, but I haven't compiled them and edited them. So in Granada, there was a time when there are times when things are peaceful, because a caliph will come along, a leader will come along who does not fully implement the Sharia. Then maybe his son takes over, or maybe he dies and a new person comes along, and this person decides to become a lot more strict. He will now implement the Sharia fully. So there were times when Christians and Jews living under their rule, would become seniors within the government, and this was not allowed because no Muslim is allowed to be subordinate to a non-Muslim. And what happened was, in Granada, for instance, within one day, the Muslims rioted once the caliph died, and they murdered, I think, between 4,000 and 4,500 Jews, and Christians as well, but they had a soft spot for the Jews, and they murdered about 4,500 Jews. Now, you don't have pogroms like this on a regular basis unless there is no tolerance, there is no forgiveness, there is no appreciation of the other. Understand? And also, they can point to long periods of time where there was no fighting, but this is because the others had learned, if you step out of line, you die. You step out of line, your daughter is raped, she's given to a Muslim as a sex slave, your house is burned down, your properties are taken, right? So they learned to just toe the line, keep their heads down and their mouths shut. Now, many of these Muslims that they claim to be Muslims who invented everything, many of them are often, or some are often Christians who happen to have Arab names. So these are simply, they've co-opted a lot of things. So there was no, the period of the golden era within Cordoba is actually a period of subjugation and totalitarianism, and that's something I can go into on another time once I finish the slides and we go through the records, you go through the proper historical records. But there was no golden age of Islam. It was all plagiarism, it is all theft, because they don't produce, they steal from slaves who work. It's extortion. I'll pause there.
Thank you. Any questions, guys? Yeah, we have a question. One moment. Go ahead, AJ. Jerry H, can you ask a question?
Hello,
Hello there.
you can hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. My understanding was when Muhammad teachings was supposed to be illiterate and people wrote it down on whatever pieces of skin and stuff like that.
Yes.
But the Quran itself wasn't created, some people say maybe 70 to 80 years later.
So, yeah.
Is this true?
Correct. I don't have the reference in front of me right now, but there were two caliphs. There was, I think, Abu Bakr, who 20 years now, the Quran was written on parchment, on scraps of leaves, on stones, on bone. It was collected together from people's memories, and it was all compiled apparently in fragments, and it was stored under his wife's bed for 20 years. The most critical manuscript in all of Islam, the presence of Allah on the face of the earth himself, was stored under his wife's bed for 20 years and forgotten about. And then one day Abu Bakr decided, oh hey, you know, we need to get this book and actually write it out as an actual book. This happened 20 years after Muhammad died. That's the story. But what is odd is that, and of course he burned all of the other competing copies. He made his own what's called the Uthmanic recension, right? The Uthmanic, so the Uthmanic recension. So he burned all the competing copies, and he made his own version. Okay. Now what's interesting is that 20 years or 40 years after him, a different caliph claimed that he compiled the Quran. So Uthman claimed to compile the Quran, and then 40 years later, again I would have to check the references to be exact here, a different caliph claimed that he compiled the Quran. So now you've got this conflict, and this is an interesting conflict. Muslims can't explain any of this stuff, and they're told, I need to go into the Sharia, but Muslims are told to accept and believe with no evidence. This is a requirement of being a Muslim, that you must accept and believe with no evidence. Okay, so yes, but your story is true. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's perfect. It's a question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I remember meeting, it's kind of like a story. I remember meeting a Muslim from Ireland in Dublin, and he was a bit angry, and he was giving out about whatever America and Britain and, you know, the usual. So I remember just sharing, and, you know, I just said, he asked me, why are you here? He said, I'm just listening to you. So he says, well, what's your point of view of it? And I said, do you believe in Allah? And he says, yes, I do. And I said, do you know what logic is? And he says, yes, I'm a doctor. So I said to him, well, if you believe in the Almighty Allah that created the whole universe, stars, earth, and everything in the whole existence, you do? Yeah, he says. Well, why are you getting angry and fighting these battles? If the Creator wanted us to submit or get angry, the whole existence wouldn't be here. Why does he need you to fight these battles?
Well, look, that's one of those questions beyond my pay grade, right? That's an existential question or whatever. But Islam, look, I'll just bring it back to Islamic doctrine. I mean, Islam could have been invented by Bigfoot in Walt Disney's garage in 1953 for all we know. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But what it might have been, could have been, should have been, doesn't matter. What it is what is important. We need to deal with reality. Islam is a religion of war. It is not a religion of peace, and none of the early scholars ever claimed that. They were proud of their warfare. They were proud of their slavery. They were proud of their sex slavery. They were proud of their conquests. So this is a modern invention. Okay, so Islam is a religion of war. It is very proud of its war. And don't forget, Muslims, again, I will have to show you the Sharia. We need to go through an episode to discuss the Islamic doctrines of deception, the Islamic doctrines of lying, but Muslims are required. Now, I'll make this simple. Islam has a different moral basis than Judaism, than Christianity, than Western morality. Okay, communism is, of course, is not what I would call Western morality, right? So Muslims are required by law to lie to you. They are required by law of Allah and Muhammad to lie to you, to defend Islam, to present Islam in the best possible light. They are obligated, with no choice, to lie to you. So Muslims must, without option, lie to you to present Islam in a good manner. We can discuss this at another time. This is their law, and this is in their second most read Islamic holy text called the Ihya Ulum al-Din by a man called Al-Ghazali, who is the second most important scholar in Islam after Muhammad himself. So I would not take anything that a Muslim propagandist, you can call it a Muslim apologist, tells me, because they didn't even know that it's, and don't forget, Islam, anything they say, anything they do is judged by its intention, not by its outcome. It's called the niyat, right? So action is judged by intention. If they mean well but they do evil, that is forgotten, and the intention, which is good, to defend Allah, to defend Muhammad, to defend Islam, to promote Islam, to defeat the kafir, that's you, that is considered to be good, and therefore it is not considered evil. They have a different standard by which they judge morality, and non-Muslims are woefully unaware of this fact. So keep that in mind. Hopefully that helps you.
Thank you very much. Perfect.
Any more questions, guys? Please
any comments from you, Harry, on what I've said? Any sort of feedback, or just to play devil's advocate or whatever the case might be?
I cannot do the devil's advocate. I am definitely on your side. I think that what you're doing is the work of a warrior, and unfortunately for me, very few people realize the dangers of Islam.
Yeah.
And so I think that you bring that to light, especially with what's happening today in Europe. People have to wake up to recognize the danger, because it's going to bite them and it's going to be vicious.
Okay. So then I'll finish up and I'll go through this final Sharia manual to talk a little bit about Islamic warfare, to give people perspective, and if no one's willing to. So I've jumped forward to a page, and this is actually the final page I was going to cover, but I'll start here and go to the beginning and come back here. This is part of, now this is not the full context, and I have to do a show on jihad specifically, right, Islamic warfare. But this is the most, now we saw the most detailed and complete Islamic Sharia manual. Okay, if it is not the case that is the most detailed and complete Islamic Sharia manual, as Muslims may or may not say in the comments, or may or may not tell us, then if it's not, please specify in the comments which one is. Give us the name of the book, the name of the scholar, and which chapter we can find the rulings that are authoritative, if the ones that I provided are not. Because Muslims are going to make assertions. They're going to say, no, it's not, it's wrong. Well, I've provided the name of the book, I've shown you the page, you can download it for yourself. So if you say this is not authoritative, show me which book is authoritative. Now, unfortunately, this does leave Muslims in a bind, because it is unlawful, because it is treason. It is treason for a Muslim to reveal the Sharia. Okay, for multiple reasons. I'm not going to go into that right now, but it is treason for Muslims to reveal Islamic law to a non-Muslim. Okay, there are some very minor circumstances where they can, to a very minor degree, but they cannot do so. They would be violating the law. They would be revealing the weaknesses and the secrets of Islam, and they could suffer the death penalty, potentially. So therefore, they cannot reveal the Sharia. The only option they have is to lie about it. So understand. So I appreciate your opinion. Your opinion is nonsense. I have no time for it. You show me the opinion of your scholars. So if I show you, for instance, the opinion of the Pope, right, in Catholicism, and I say, here's what the Pope says, and then some Catholic says, well, I don't think so. You know what? That's a heretic. He's an apostate. I don't care what that's one person out of billions that has an opinion. Who cares? Your opinion has no value. If your top scholars, your absolute infallible scholars who can never make a mistake, say something, who are you to have an opinion? Okay? So, show me the book, give me the name, give me the page, give me the chapter, then we'll talk. Whoever enters Islam before being captured may not be killed, nor his property confiscated, or his young children taken captive. So in other words, if you are captured before you become a Muslim, you can be killed, your property taken, and your young children taken as slaves. When a child or woman is taken captive, they become slaves by the fact of capture. Okay, I think that is very, very clear. And the woman's previous marriage is immediately annulled. These laws, the Sharia, can never be abrogated. The Sharia can never be abrogated. It is permanent for all time. Okay, so if your wife or child are taken captive, you are killed, more than likely. Your wife and child become slaves. She may become a sex slave. She may be sold. Your kids might become sex slaves. You never know. They could be used to work. They could be sold for money. They could be used as janissaries, as soldiers, right? And her marriage is immediately annulled so that the slave owner can have his way with her. So now I am going to jump to the beginning and let's have a quick look through this. And now understand that these Sharia manuals are written by scholars who often whitewash them, who will often, let's say, not translate them entirely accurately. Okay, so you need to get second and third opinions on these things to see the truth. Even in this manual, there are certain sections which the translator has added, which do not exist in the original Arabic. So they're not completely, some section, not all of it. Okay, this manual is the most authoritative. Now, it's not as detailed as the Hidayah, but this one is the most common Islamic Sharia manual or Islamic sacred law manual in the world. This is called the Reliance of the Traveler. It is the most sold, it is the most bought, the most known, the most used Islamic sacred law manual on earth. Okay, and it is used by imams, used by sheikhs, used in court, etc. But it is also bought by common or garden variety Muslims to have at home. As a reference, it was designed as a single volume. It has a little bit of everything, so that it covers the authorities from all of the different schools, gives you the most authoritative rulings from all of them. So the beauty of this one is it's one volume, it was easy to carry, it had a little bit of everything, and it tells you where to find the rest of the information. So this little compendium is very, very helpful. So let's have a look here at the index. Apostasy from Islam is Ridda. Notice it says here, whoever voluntarily leaves Islam is killed. I think that's pretty clear. There's no ambiguity there. We can go there a different day. We can talk about apostasy from Islam, and yeah, they have to kill you. There's no argument there. There is no indemnity or expiation for killing an apostate. It's okay, go and do it. No problem. Allah loves you. Now let's look at jihad, the legal, the Shari definition of jihad. Of the 14 different kinds, we're now going to see the main definition of jihad. The meaning of jihad, section 09.0, the scriptural basis from the Quran for the jihad, as well as the hadith. The obligatory character of jihad, jihad's obligatory. Who is obliged to fight in jihad? The objectives of jihad, and regarding Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians. The rules of warfare, and blah, blah, blah. So 597, I need to go to page 617. So this is page 597. I'm now going to jump ahead to page 617. We're going to go up to page 622 within the reader. Now, this is the legal definition of jihad. You will find this in numerous Sharia manuals. They all have similar wording, right? They all agree on this. So you're not going to find any conflict with the one says it's like this and the other, they're all the same. The section here in black I have taken out. I can show you this in a moment, but I've left it out because this section was added by the translator. It does not exist in the original Arabic. It is actually based on a fabricated hadith or fabricated narration about Muhammad. Muslims will go on and on about that's a weak hadith, that's a weak hadith, that's weak, we can't trust it. This is actually fabricated, and they love it because it says what they wanted to say. They love fabricated lies when the lie goes in their favor. So this is the original. Jihad means to war against non-Muslims and is etymologically derived from the word mujahada, signifying warfare to establish Islam. The scriptural basis for jihad prior to the scholarly consensus, the ijma, the consensus of the scholars, that is the final version of Islam. Remember when they say it's how it's interpreted? Well, the ijma, what we're reading right now, is the final consensus, the final understanding, the final interpretation, the finalized version of Islam with all of the confusion removed. The scriptural basis for jihad prior to scholarly consensus is such Quranic verses as fighting is prescribed for you, Quran 2:216. Notice they've taken just a fragment of the sentence. Muslims always claim that's out of context. Well, your own Sharia, by your own scholars, your own mujtahids mutlaq, your perfect scholars, even they take things out of context. Slay them wherever you find them, Quran 4:89. Fight the idolaters utterly, Quran 9:36. And such hadiths as the one related by Bukhari and Muslim, that the Prophet said, I have been commanded to fight people until they testify that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. If they say it, they have saved their blood and possessions from me. Again, in accord with the law that we've just read. Okay, I will continue. We're going to page 622, so I'll stop at places. The obligatory character of jihad. Jihad is a communal obligation. When enough people perform it to successfully accomplish it, it is no longer obligatory upon others. Remember, the ones doing it are doing it out of azima, strictness. And the other ones, the other 9 billion or whatever Muslims, however they are, they're the ones following rukhsah. They're not required to. They're exempt because others have made this act, this devotion to Allah of murdering non-Muslims. He who provides the equipment for a soldier in jihad has himself performed jihad. So the Muslim who pays zakat, who doesn't tell the policeman about something he saw, whatever he does, he's doing jihad. There are 14 kinds of jihad that we know of. Those believers who are unhurt but sit behind are not equal to those who fight in Allah's cause with their property and with their lives. Quran 4:95. So your commoner God and rukhsah Muslims are not equal to those who kill and are killed in jihad for the sake of spreading Islam. If none of those concerned perform jihad and it does not happen, then everyone who is aware that it is obligatory is guilty of sin. So jihad was a communal obligation. Okay? And there are 2 possible states in respect to non-Muslims. Now it says here, notice this is in accord with the Hidayah. We can go through multiple different Sharia manuals, you'll find the same. So there are 2 possible states in respect to non-Muslims that Muslims can adopt. They can see us in 2 ways. The first is when non-Muslims, that's you, are in their own countries. Denmark, Greenland, Ireland. In which case, jihad is a communal obligation, and this is what our author is speaking of when he says jihad is a communal obligation, meaning upon the Muslims each year. So if they're in Arabia and you're sitting at home enjoying your hot cocoa in Denmark, Muslims are required to come knocking on your door to steal your wife and daughter and kill you and take your cows and your land and your country, because it is obligatory upon them to do this. Okay, so if you are in your own country minding your own business, Muslims are required to come and invade you. So there is no religion of peace, there is no defense. That is a lie. Please show me, if you're a Muslim, show me the Sharia, show me the fiqh. I want to see. Scholar, book, chapter, verse, you show me. I am not interested in the Quran. You can't even show me how to do the prayers from the Quran. It's incomplete. You can't show me a proper listing of the 5 pillars of Islam. You can't even show me the 5 prayers properly laid out. How to do the prayers. It's not in the Quran. Okay, it's in the Sharia. So, okay, so yeah, let me just finish this. So I'm on 618, so I'll just continue. Okay, so there's only the second cause is when others invade Muslims, but that's second. Primarily, they must invade you first. Okay, do to others before they do unto you. That's very Islamic. Jihad is personally obligatory for everyone able to perform it, male or female. Okay, that's everyone. That means sudden jihad syndrome is a real thing. Okay? Right, even Muslim women are obliged to fight. Now, who is obliged to fight in jihad? Those called upon to perform jihad when it is a communal obligation are every able-bodied man who has reached puberty and is sane. Now you'll notice that since 2015, when there were these jihad attacks that happened all over Europe, there was this massive outbreak of lone wolf attacks. You know, there were large packs of lone wolves roaming around Europe killing people. And two, there was a large outbreak of mental illness in the Islamic community. Oh, he's not well. He's not well. In Canada, he's not well. In New Zealand, he's not so happy up here. Okay? In England, in France, in Belgium, he's not so happy. No, they're required to be sane. The claim of insanity is a lie. Muslims who go on jihad are required to do it rationally. Why? Because of niyat, intention. I mentioned intention earlier. Allah judges the intention, not the action. So if you do this without a clear intention to worship Allah, to glorify Allah through stabbing a girl to death in the street, or to drive over babies with your truck, if you don't do this with a clear intention as worship to Allah, Allah doesn't accept your worship. Okay? So you have to be sane and you have to be clear about what you are doing. So don't believe the lies. It really is a joke. Okay? And they will lie to you whole day, every day, for free. It says here, it is offensive to conduct a military expedition against hostile Muslims without the caliph's permission. Fantastic. So then a caliph was ordering these Muslims to go and kill in jihad on the streets of Paris, on the streets of London. Although it does say, if there is no caliph, no permission is required. So maybe they don't need a caliph. You must have a caliph. You don't need one. You must have it. Just go kill them. Don't worry about the caliph. There you go. Every single law, read my lips here, please. And my name is not George Bush, though. Every single law in Islam has an out, has its opposite, has its reverse. There is not a single ruling in Islam that cannot be broken, that does not have its opposite when necessary. This is a fundamental function of Islamic law. Okay? It's one of the 6 pillars of the Sharia, but that, again, is a story for another day. So Muslims may not seek help from non-Muslim allies unless the Muslims are considerably outnumbered and the allies are of goodwill towards the Muslims. And now the objectives of jihad. Let's have a look. I'm going to zoom in here. The caliph makes war, or the non-caliph, as necessary, the single Muslim, makes war upon Jews, Christians and Zoroastrians, provided he has first invited them to enter Islam in faith and practice, and if they will not, then invited them to enter the social order, subjugation under Islam, by paying the jizya. It's not a poll tax, it is punishment, it is retribution. And understand, of course, if he doesn't invite them, that's also okay too, as we saw in the other Sharia manual. The war will continue until you become Muslim, or else you pay the non-Muslim poll tax in accordance with the word of Allah, the Most High. Fight those who do not believe in Allah. The war, the Islamic war, will continue forever. It will never stop. Okay, and I'm coming towards the end. Until they pay the poll tax out of hand and are humbled. We saw that in the definition of deen, that's Quran 9:29, they're speaking about you being humiliated and subjugated under the authority and control of Islam. And they say that, of course, there is no compulsion in religion, which is known as a lie. That is, so they will always quote you Quran 2:256, which is there's no compulsion in religion, which is a complete lie that is abrogated. It is abrogated by Quran 3:85, which says no religion other than Islam will be accepted of you. Go look up Quran 3:85 as the opposite, as the cancellation, the inverse, the opposite, the rejection of Quran 2:256. Nothing but Islam will be accepted from them. For taking the poll tax is only effective until the descent of Jesus. Because you may not be aware, but Jesus is a Muslim. Jesus will come back at the end times. He will destroy the churches. He will break the cross. So he will destroy the churches, destroy Christianity. He will kill the Christians for not worshipping Muhammad. Did I say worshipping Muhammad? Well, we need to get into that story because Muslims do worship Muhammad. He is considered the real Jesus, the genuine Jesus. Okay, the real Jesus figure, right? In fact, he is the Shiloh. If you look at the prophecies in Genesis, right, he is the Shiloh. He inherits the scepter of power from God, and he has power and authority over all mankind at the end times. Okay, and Jesus is a servant of Muhammad, who will come and do his bidding, and that's a long story on its own. That's an interesting story on its own. So, Jesus will rule by the law of Muhammad. So Jesus is a Muslim. Bet you didn't know that. And now we'll come to the end. Okay? So the Caliph fights all other peoples until they become Muslim. Even the idol worshippers either become Muslim or agree to pay the poll tax, or they are killed. And yeah, we're about to, and the rules of warfare, it is permissible to kill old men, meaning someone more than 40 years of age, and monks. Now notice the previous Sharia manual we saw said don't kill the old men. There actually was a passage in there, and don't kill the monks. Now it says, hey, go ahead and stab them in the eye. Don't worry about it. Behead them, stab them, burn them, whatever, it's okay. I know the other book said don't do it, but you know, I mean, Islam, right? And yeah, here's where we're going to end. Whoever enters Islam before being captured may not be killed. So if, in other words, if you think, oh my gosh, I better convert now because I don't want to die, then you may not be killed, nor your property confiscated, or your children taken captive, except we can go to other rules that say if you convert before being captured, you can still be killed. So yeah, we'll get to that another day. So there's just, Islam makes no sense whatsoever unless you're drunk and insane. So when a child or woman is taken captive, they become slaves by the fact of capture, and the woman's previous marriage is immediately annulled. When an adult male is taken captive, the caliph considers the interests of Islam and the Muslims. He decides between the prisoner's death. Notice it just said here, don't kill them, but now the prisoner's death. Release without paying anything, or ransoming him in exchange for money, or for a Muslim, which is called extortion, or for a Muslim captive held by the enemy. If the prisoner becomes a Muslim, the caliph chooses any of the four alternatives. Then he may not be killed. Okay, I may have spoken too soon there, and any one of the other three alternatives is chosen. Okay, I have to take that back. That's the rule. Although, understand that this can be broken. There is not a single ruling in Islam which cannot be broken. Okay, when they need to break any rule, they can break any and every rule. Don't believe everything you read, because I certainly don't. I was doing 80, I got pulled over on the highway, and the cop said, didn't you see the sign said 40? And I said, no, I don't believe everything I read. Neither should you. Okay, so let's give an old joke a home week. Sorry, I was giving away some old jokes that I don't need anymore. Okay, it is permissible in jihad to cut down the enemy's trees and destroy their dwellings. They'll always say, no, we can't burn your trees. Yes, they can. And I'm going to stop here, okay? Truces. Truces are only if they're too weak to fight, or if the truce gives them a tactical advantage superior to actually going out and killing you. I will stop here. So hopefully we've now explained Islamic law, given you a solid perspective on Islamic international law, the laws of jihad, as well as why the Crusades were critical, and just how vicious the Islamic armies were, and why the Crusades were a heroic but very late defensive action to save Europe. And yeah, it may come to the fact that we need to have a crusade again. I'll stop here. Thank you guys. I'll take questions.
Any questions, guys? Please wave if you have a question. 1 second, we have a question.
Okay.
Dave DePont, go ahead, please.
Damn, I missed this presentation, and it came in a few minutes ago.
It's recorded, you can hear it. It's the second episode already.
Okay. How do you avoid triggering followers?
You cannot.
Didn't think so.
They're following, okay, so the primary doctrine, I showed this last week. We'll do this another time because I'll do a show on that subject entirely, but the primary doctrine in Islam derives from one or two Islamic verses, Quran 3:108 or Quran 3:104, depending who you ask. These are where Muslims are instructed to command the right and forbid the wrong. This is the primary, most fundamental, most important doctrine in Islam, commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. So they have to enforce the Sharia, in other words, enforce the Sharia on everybody, Muslim and non-Muslim. The Sharia applies to you too. And they must forbid the wrong. In other words, they must prevent their own people, as well as you, non-Muslims, from doing anything contrary to the will of Allah and the will of Muhammad. So the commanding the right and forbidding the wrong has a number of escalating steps. Now understand, they don't have to follow these steps in sequence. They can go straight from, I don't like what you did, to stabbing you in the eye to kill you, right? Or beheading you on a British street, if they feel that's appropriate, or they just feel like it. Now, typically, they need to provide you with information. They have to say to you, you know, according to Islam, according to the law, this is how it is, and you know, you shouldn't really do that or say that, right? If that providing of advice, of information doesn't work, they need to use sweet words. That's the second step. I covered this last week. I showed the references within the Sharia. They have to use sweet words. They've got to say, you know, blah, blah, nice, 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 nicety, 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 nicety. If that doesn't work, they then have to switch immediately to using abusive, vile language. The Sharia actually explicitly says they have to abuse you. They have to use harsh, abusive language on you, basically calling you whatever, saying your mother is whatever, okay? They're allowed to say anything and everything. This is legal. If that doesn't work, they then have to use their hand. They must apply the law with their hand, okay? You can fill in your own blanks from there. If that doesn't work, if using their hand, in other words, they can break things and they can hit you, okay, or kick you, right? They're allowed to use force, right? They can smash things, they can break things, they can throw rocks. This is legal. The next step within the commanding the right and forbidding the wrong is then they're supposed to use intimidation. Notice they're first allowed to punch you in the face, and then if that doesn't work, then they must use intimidation. Not intimidation, then punch you. It's punch you, then intimidation. And this they say, if you don't stop doing this, I am going to fill in the blank. If that doesn't work, then they have to use weapons. And if weapons aren't sufficient, they need to bring a gang. And if a gang doesn't work, they need to bring a gang with weapons. These are the sequential steps of commanding the right and forbidding the wrong. And nothing you do is going to make them happy, because any criticism of Islam, as I showed last week, is considered illegal, and any slight against Islam is punishable by death. This is the law. Does that answer your question?
Pretty much the conclusion I'd already come to, having studied the origins and its history. Thank you.
Yeah, I can actually show you this. I can actually show this so that people can see this. I'm just busy opening this document and downloading it. Do you have any other questions?
Is it true that games like chess, gammon and dice are haram?
So yes, games are illegal. There's a reference within the Sharia that speaks of games. So games which reward Muslim men in such a way that it encourages them to go on jihad. So games that teach them how to kill, or games that incentivize them to kill and to go on war, those are legal. Anything that encourages them to go on jihad is permissible. But other games are considered a waste of time.
I was specifically interested in chess.
As to my knowledge, yes, look, I need to look. I hate to make an opinion if I don't have a clear answer with the reference book in front of me. But to my knowledge, the answer would be yes. Now, I'm not saying that chess wasn't played or hasn't been played. Okay? The Sharia is flexible. In other words, depending on the time or the day or the period or whatever, who's in charge or whatever the case might be, for diplomatic reasons. But generally speaking, such pursuits are considered a waste of time. So games... And also we would have to find the correct Sharia manual that discusses that in detail, or the scholar that has the writings on that are considered authoritative. So briefly, have a look here. The summary of the unsheathed sword against the one who insults the messenger. Notice, not the one who insults Muhammad, the one who insults, sorry, not the one who insults Allah, the one who insults Big Mo, right? But this is by Shaykh al-Islam, Ibn Taymiyyah. He's the very first to gain the title, the Shaykh al-Islam. Is the very first Muslim scholar. So this is a major Muslim scholar, the very first to gain this honorific, this major title as scholar. The book is called The Unsheathed Sword Against the One Who Insults the Messenger. And it tells us here in the index, let's just go straight to the index, whoever insults the Prophet is to be killed, whether they are a Muslim or a disbeliever. So if you were asking me, how do you not offend them? Well, it's going to be very hard. The second issue, killing is prescribed on him, the one who insults Muhammad, and it is not permitted to imprison him or show him favor or to ransom him. So even if you've now converted to Islam, but they can still kill you. Understand? All of these rules, they can fiddle around with these rules and find a way to kill you. Any Muslim or non-Muslim who insults the Prophet is to be killed. I think that's pretty clear. So let's have a look at this book. Now this is a Sharia manual which claims the following. The contents of this book concern the Islamic ruling upon those who insult the final prophet and messenger, Muhammad. So this is to give us the legal rulings of Islam upon those who insult Muhammad. How is insult defined? Well, that's subjective, isn't it? So you don't know. They could just decide, I don't like your face, you've insulted Muhammad, as it happens in Pakistan all the time. You drank from the cup of a Muslim, and you're a Christian, and you have defiled the cup because you are dirty. You're a filthy kafir, you're a filthy non-Muslim, your lips touch their cup, therefore you've insulted Islam, you must die. This has happened. This still happens in Pakistan today and other places. So it says here, if they do not become Muslim, they are to be killed by the sword. Okay, so let's have a look here. But let's have a look at this. So the objective of this work was to clarify the Islamic ruling on this subject, okay, on insulting. So the first issue, the one who insults the Prophet, whether Muslim or disbeliever, is to be killed. And let's have a look briefly. I'm just going to skip over some stuff here, but we'll just see here what it says. The Muslims have a consensus that whoever insults Allah or His Messenger or rejects anything from what has been revealed by Allah, such a person is a disbeliever. I do not know anyone who differed concerning the obligation of killing such a person. The scholars have consensus that whoever insults the Messenger, attributing a defect to him, such a person is a disbeliever. And what happens to disbelievers? So if you believe that Muhammad was not perfect, and Muslims are required to believe that Muhammad is perfect, well, you have just committed the crime of Sab al-Rasul. You have insulted the Messenger. The Muslim who insults is killed. There's no disagreement concerning this, okay, in the view of the four Imams. And the dhimmi is also killed, okay, and you are all dead from this. Does that clarify for you?
Yep, very good. In fact, I'm just trying to download the PDF.
Okay, fine. Any more questions?
I cannot see anyone waving. I have a question about Muhammad.
Of course.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember that he was illiterate, if it's true, and also that he was basically attacked by a demon when he received the prophecies, and then he was convinced by his older wife that it was actually a god or something like that, or
yes, she was the one who okay, so again, I prefer to have references in front of me. So
okay.
All the prophets of the Old Testament basically met God, okay, usually on a mountaintop, on open space in the light. Whereas Muhammad went into a cave. Okay, so he went into a cave, and of course very often with the prophets usually there was a witness to this, and they met God, right? In Muhammad's case, there were no witnesses. He was alone in a cave, and a demon grabbed him and choked him or squeezed him. His wife is the one who convinced him that he had met Allah. Now, he did not meet Allah, he met supposedly the angel Gabriel, right? Or an entity that supposedly claimed to be the angel Gabriel. Now, he spent some weeks or months wanting to commit suicide, wanting to kill himself after this encounter. So he tried multiple times to kill himself after this encounter. Now, there is evidence. I need to, again, look into this. I found some research. I'm not entirely happy with it. I don't think it's sourced well enough. But there is apparently evidence that his family, his Arab family, were involved in the occult, that they were involved in various strands of worship of the occult within that region. So he comes from an occult background. At least his family does, his wife, his uncle, his grandfather, and so on. So there's lots of stories there. For instance, there's some contradictory stories in the hadith where it says Muhammad's illiterate. However, one of the hadith around the time where he's dying, he asks for pen and paper so that he can write down some instructions for his family. So there are stories, and he was a merchant, supposedly a very successful merchant. Now, how do you be a merchant and you can't record your sales? And there's questions around that.
I think the question of there's a difference between illiterate and being able to write in terms of language.
Right.
In fact, English in the UK is taught. When I went to school, there's two things were taught separately. I think the illiteracy, maybe. Have you heard of the name Waraka?
Yeah, I'll get to that. So technically, he was a man who had no letters, which could mean he didn't know how to write. Doesn't mean necessarily he didn't know how to read. So yes, you could interpret that, I believe, that way. Waraka is Waraka ibn Nawfal. He is the monk that is the cousin of his first wife, Khadija. Now, there's a lot of discrepancies around her age, because the commonly accepted age of, now apparently the number 40 must have some kind of occult or spiritual significance within Islam, because Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, his wife was 40, but she bore him 6 kids. Now, for a 40-year-old woman to have 6 children from the age of 40 onwards is highly unlikely in the 7th century Arabia, right? So, when you go, there's a book called Popular but Untrue, or Popular but Inauthentic Stories in the Hadith or something, or stories about Muhammad. Popular but inauthentic. In other words, false stories that are popular, mythical stories about Muhammad. That's a very interesting book. I can actually bring it up and show you guys, but another day. But they claim, the scholars claim that his wife was 25, but Muslims will swear on a grave that she was 40. And yet the scholars will tell you she's 25, 28, she was 36, she was 32. They give you multiple different ages. The common ages from the scholars who say, look, I mean, if she had 6 kids, she had to be like 25. You know? So, back to Waraka. So Waraka was, some say he was an Nestorian. However, we can, I think, reasonably conclude that he was a Gnostic. So he was heretical. Now, I hate the term Gnostic Christian, or Gnostic Christianity, because it's anti-Christian. It's a heresy. It's completely a violation of Christian doctrine. So the Gnostics, and scholars very, very disingenuously speak of different kinds of Christianities. Look, if you have, if you have different kinds of cars, like ones with square wheels pulled by donkeys, and one with petrol engines, and one that are pulled by slaves where you use whips on them, those aren't cars. Those aren't different kinds of cars. I mean, those are not cars, right? So he was supposedly a priest who, supposedly a Christian, but as far as we can tell, he was a Gnostic, and he had taught Muhammad. He was the one who married Muhammad and his first wife. So he taught Muhammad lots of Gnostic myths and Gnostic beliefs, which were eventually incorporated into Muhammad's beliefs and in the Quran. Sorry, yes, Waraka, go on.
So I had heard that he was maybe a scribe or a translator, and that because Muhammad had lost his father quite young.
Muhammad's father died 4 years before Muhammad was born.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So Muhammad's dad died 4 years before Muhammad was born.
Yeah.
So you figure that out. You do the maths on that one.
No, there's this thing that the spoon can hang around for quite a long time, I know. But what I was going to say was that Muhammad used to suffer from, should we say, something like panic attack.
Okay, so the story is, according to, so this story seemed, now one theory, shall we say, one theory is that he was an epileptic, he was an auditory epileptic. So he suffered from fits. That's why he banned music, because apparently music caused him to have epileptic fits. That's why music was banned in Islam, except for a particular, very basic kind of music which did not trigger his epilepsy. There's more to that story. I'm not going to tell you now, because then it's going to sound like I'm telling you about UFOs and Bigfoot. So let me not go there. We can do that another day. But yeah, there's another strand on that.
Okay, we have another question. Jer H, can you go ahead?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Just one more thing. Is it true that Muhammad married? There's some talks that he was some kind of a pedophile, some girl at age 8 or something like that.
So he married his second-in-command's daughter, who was only 6 at the time. Okay, she fell ill from some disease, and he held off from having sex with her until her hair grew back after she got well, and he consummated with her when she was 9. Okay, so basically the day she turned 9 or the day after. Now, of course, this would be the moon calendar. So according to that, she would have been 8 years and 11 months old, or 8 years and 10 months old at the time that he had sex with her. Anything that Muhammad did is both legal and moral within Islam, so therefore it is legal and moral for Islamic men to have sex with young girls. Now, of course, Muslims will deny this. They will try and claim she was 19 or 18. However, the most authentic volumes, the most highly regarded scholars, including his cousin Ibn Abbas, if I remember, Ibn Abbas, as well as the Sahih narrations, the authentic narrations by Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari, the most authentic, the most highly regarded of the canonical narrations about Muhammad, all very bluntly state that she was 6 years old. Now, On that score, last week I covered very explicitly and very clearly the Islamic law on marriage and divorce. Says, someone, please, you're making a noise, so please mute your microphone. So the Islamic law very clearly and explicitly states that there is no minimum age for sex with a girl in Islam. So a Muslim man is able to, as long as he feels, in his opinion, he's not going to tear her vagina, it's legal for him to have sex with an infant. They define it as infant, and in Islam an infant is defined as a baby in the cradle. So it is perfectly legal, and I showed this last week. I went through 3 different, I think, Sharia manuals, and I showed some of the references. I can do a show on this, but yes, so by Western standards, Muhammad was a pedophile, and Islam permits pedophilia, yes. Does that answer your question?
Hey, I muted it because of the sounds. 1 second.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead again.
Yeah, no, I kind of heard that. Okay, it's a bit disturbing, to be honest. You know, one of my friends is just an adopted on Islam, and he's after converted. You know, and to be honest, I know a lot of Muslims, and the majority wouldn't know any of this stuff. Like, you know what I mean? There's supposed like Catholics in Ireland, like, who, you know, and no one practices it anymore or stuff like that. So like all these new Muslims coming up, like I've heard of none of this stuff that you're talking about. You know, I've heard of bits and pieces from documentaries and stuff like that. But you know, if you say it to a Muslim, they go, "Oh no, it's about peace, it's about love, it's about this," you know. But the stuff that you're quoting tonight, like it's blowing my mind. You know what I mean? And
Right.
I'd love to actually get this, my friend that's doing his doctorate on this, to look you up on YouTube and see what he thinks of it, you know.
Look up my name, Lloyd de Jongh. I do speak of this. I have spoken at length on this. I've done shows. I can show you right now. I mean, but I showed it last week in the previous show, and you can look in the references. Get the Reliance of the Traveler. The links are in the show notes. Get the Reliance of the Traveler. Look up the word prepubescent. Look up the word infant. Okay? And then also go through the Hidayah. Look up prepubescent. And then also, in the previous show, I showed the Digest of Muhammadan Law, okay, which is still in use in the courts in Pakistan, as is the Hidayah. Okay, so the references I showed are still in use in the court system in Islamic countries today. And they very explicitly tell you that sex with prepubescent, they don't specify a lower age. Okay, there is no lower age limit. It is perfectly legal.
Wow, great stuff. Thank you for the information.
You're welcome.
And just one other question for yourself. Why have you dedicated, I probably missed this, but why have you dedicated your life? Are you afraid of Islam doing something to the West, or do you think they have a plan to take over?
Of course they do.
You know,
I don't think that's open for debate. But I worked in the Middle East for 11 years. I traveled extensively throughout the Middle East. I was working in national defense. I traveled. My job was to make sure that groups like ISIS didn't blow things up and kill people. And it was after I went to Lebanon, which was nominally a Christian country, that I saw what Islam had done to it. And I realized, you know, I need to understand this, and I need to talk about this. And Islam is, and I say this as honestly as I can, it is filthy. Islam is vile. It is disgusting. And I can't phrase it any other way, because once, whatever the topic, we go into the Sharia. I don't care about the Quran, that's not important. You go into the Sharia, the laws of the scholars, and it is the most vile, filthy thing you've ever read.
wow. Thank you.
You're welcome.
What advice would you give to places where their enclaves have established themselves in terms of making sure that the vulnerable and also the people who are naively unaware, as many middle-class fools where I am are, as to the potential threat? I mean, I've been banned from certain retail, even a farm shop, by a woman who was selling pork pies, because I was silly enough to publicly criticize the creed.
Wow. Yeah, look, unfortunately, Islam, without lies, Islam dies. That's a fairly common saying you'll see. All you can do is speak the truth, right? Now, I'll give you a basic, okay, so So Islam, because it couldn't defeat the West militarily, it has to do so by stealth, right? It has to do so through infiltration and propaganda, ideological warfare. Now, ideological warfare has, shall we say, three main basic components: shame, amnesia, and irrationality. Shame. You will not defend what you're ashamed of. So, you're a racist. Your people practice slavery. Oh my God, look at the Atlantic slave trade. Look at the 350,000 slaves that went to both America and Canada. Let's ignore the 14.5 million slaves that went to South America, to those brown people who just loved their slavery. You know, those 30 times more slaves that went to those guys. And let's ignore the 80 million slaves that went to Arabia, that the Muslims took to Arabia from Africa, of whom 90% of them died. And of course, there are no blacks in the Middle East today because they cut off the willies and the balls of all of these slaves and made sure that they killed the babies, because the Muslim Arabs were vicious. Right? So let's ignore the 80 million dead slaves that went to Arabia. Let's focus on those 350,000 slaves that went to America and Canada. So shame. So if you are ashamed, you will back down. You will shut up. So shame is the first prong of attack. 2. Amnesia. What you've forgotten, you cannot draw inspiration from. So destroy your culture, destroy your statues, modify your history to forget things, to change things. So you cannot draw inspiration from your culture. You cannot say, but I love pork and I hate this Islamic nonsense, right? So in other words, so there's a combination of shame and amnesia. If you've forgotten the Crusades, if you've forgotten what happened, you cannot be aware of threats, because one of the prime function of this is that you become unable to recognize and respond to threats. You are unable to tell ally from enemy, and therefore your defense mechanism is not triggered and you do not respond when you need to. So that is amnesia. The third is irrationality, the destruction of reason, the destruction of logic. So they need to destroy logic. So I feel like a woman today. I'm a girl. I identify. In other words, I pretend to be. Okay? I pretend to fart the smell of roses. We all know it's not true. Okay? So Islam, unfortunately, I won't go into depth here, but I need to prepare a proper argument and discussion on that. But the destruction of reason. So in other words, when you bring up facts, okay, facts, logic, and reason, history must be destroyed. So when you bring up facts, they will attack you. Okay? So all of these three work together. Okay, now there are multiple different things. Now, in terms of defending against this, 1, these people will perpetually, non-stop, relentlessly push this nonsense. You are obligated, morally, you are obligated to fight against it. Okay? Because when you do, you need to identify there's a lie and you need to go after that lie. Because, so, there are lots of bad experiments in science. There are lots of very bad experiments in psychology. Psychology is a lot of crap most of the time. But one of the most interesting and most repeated and verifiable experiments is called the Asch conformity experiments. These go back to the early 1950s. So, short version, he takes a bunch of students, or actors, or whichever, and he takes another student, dumps him in the class, and he draws on the board, I don't know, a horse, a dog, and a carrot. And he points at the carrot and he says, horse. And all the students go, yeah, that's a lovely horse. And he points at the horse and he says, dog. And everyone's, oh, that dog is so beautiful. And the student, that's the control, he's dumped in there, and he goes, that's a carrot, that's not a horse, that's a dog, that's not a horse, but that's not a bunny, that's a carrot. And the other students look at him, and eventually, out of shame, out of embarrassment, out of the desire not to cause a scene, just he goes along because his life will be easier, and he says, yeah, that's a great looking horse, even though they're pointing at the carrot. Okay? This experiment has been repeated successfully, and this is how you gain compliance. Okay, so you create an ideology that denies the truth. Okay, even when it's given the truth, it will fight against the truth because it causes too much pain, right? However, what was discovered as a corollary to this is that when one person, be it one person in a group of 2, one person in a group of 5 or 10,000, if one person is willing to stand up and say, that's bullshit, that's a freaking carrot, don't you tell me, suddenly what happens is the ability to control the minds of the others, the ability to infect the minds and to bend their will. I'm trying to think of a word and I can't remember. But the ability to to brainwash them is reduced by 80%. The effect of the brainwashing, because one dissident stands up and calls crap on the whole scene, reduces the ability to brainwash by 80%. And not only that, he not only diminishes the effect of the message to brainwash others, but he also starts to snap others out of the spell. He breaks the spell on others. So other people go, he's right, I agree, that is a carrot, that's not a freaking rabbit. Understand? So the truth is critically important. You are morally obligated to tell the truth in that case. You must do it. And they're going to lie. And the problem is that while they magic, if you want to call it that, while their propaganda, their ideology is powerful, it is fragile. It is very fragile. It's like you take a bucket of milk and you put one drop of black ink in it. You cannot unsee the black ink. You cannot unsee that drop. And this is what happens. So therefore you are obligated to speak up. Does that help you? Does that answer your question?
In other words, the emperor has no clothes.
The emperor has a small willy to go with it as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone has questions about willies?
So, how many women did Muhammad go through?
So he actually is called in one of the histories, he's called a womanizer. So it's Muslim men are allowed to have 4 wives. So he's known to have at one time, he had 11 wives at the same time. But if you look at the number of women he divorced and remarried, he had, it seems like throughout his career as a prophet, in his 23 years as a prophet, he had 22 wives. The perfect man.
Have you heard of the guy who invites Muslims onto his live shows called The Christian Prince or Shake Your Booty?
Yeah, I know of them. Look, I've invited Muslims on to discuss the Sharia, to go through the manuals of the schools, and they all run away from me like their hair's on fire. But yeah, I know Christian Prince. Yeah, he's studied Islam at seminary. And I must admit, though, that I'm the only person on earth, as far as I know, that discusses the Islamic law, the Sharia. No one else does, to my knowledge. They all believe they do. They think they do. They're just reading the Quran and the Hadith. None of them actually go into the Sharia, because the Hadith are not authoritative, nor is the Tafsir. The Sharia is the Sharia. That's the final version of Islam. But yeah, sorry. On you, do you have a point around Christian Prince?
Well, it was through coming across him and the fact that my youngest child was going to a school where there's close to 90% followers, I'll call them, from Pakistan too, that it caused me to start to study, and I'd lived amongst them as well in terms of the neighborhood, and it caused me to study their belief system, you know, that old thing with know thine enemy.
Correct.
And so I acquired a Quran, and I've been going through effectively analyzing it, because the translation is rubbish and it's distorted.
Of course it is.
So I was using the services of Christian Prince, who is an Arab and therefore fluent, in order to pick it apart. And you're right, when you encounter the imams or even go into the dawah groups, they do not want you there.
I've embarrassed them, I've humiliated them, because quite bluntly, I know the Sharia better than they do. I'm better trained in this than most imams. So I know the rules. They can't lie to me. They can try, but I can mop the floor with them, so I'll get banned in a minute. Yes, Harry?
How many Sharia are there regarding Islam? Is that like one system? Or
Islam is one religion. So, there are 4 major schools of jurisprudence, schools of Islamic law. There are multiple. Look, there's probably 50, I don't know, a billion schools of Islamic law. But only 4 have come through and are recognized as valid. Okay? Because the imams who founded them have, according to the Islamic scholars, achieved safety from error. Okay? And these are called the Mujtahids Mutlaq, the absolute scholars, the perfect scholars, the scholars who have a perfect understanding, a perfect application, and are free from error. Okay? In fact, they're so perfect that they have fixed the errors of Muhammad. Okay? Because Muhammad made errors, and that's why Allah had to abrogate alter, cancel, and change things in the Quran because Muhammad forgot things and Muhammad made mistakes, right? So there are four schools: the Hanafi, the Hanbali, the Maliki, and the Shafi. The Hanbali are a minority school, probably 5% of Muslims or something, give or take. Then your largest school, okay, they're like more like the slightly more ascetic school, the stripped down version. Then you've got the Hanafis, who are the largest number of Muslims, and then you have this competition between the Hanafi and the Maliki, the Shafi and the Maliki. These are the names of the scholars, right? Now, for instance, Shafi had a very massive outsized influence on the creation of the Islamic law. However, his own teachings were at the time considered very primitive, and his writings have been absorbed and enhanced and improved upon, and in some cases they've become obsolete, and they've been replaced by the writings of scholars after him. So there are four major schools, and then there's one school within the Shia. There's multiple schools. I mean, there's billions of them probably, but there's the Jafari school within Shia Islam, who the Sunnis actually recognize. So there are 5 schools of jurisprudence that are taken as authoritative and correct. Although they're not separate religions, they're just different denominations of the one religion.
So those people are voting in order to decide who is the final authority?
This happened 800-900 years ago. So that was decided upon hundreds of years ago. It was finalized in the 13th, 14th century already. Although, shall we say that the final things were finalized in the 14th century, but during those hundreds of years they finalized all of their doctrines.
I understand. Thank you. Any other questions? Please wave if you want to ask a question.
Just one on the Baha'is. They're not a pick of Islam as well. I think they believe in Baha'u'llah.
The Baha'is would be, according to Christian faith, they'd be heretics, because they're like a synthesis. They're like, I know very little about them, okay? I know very little about them. I don't think they're a threat. I don't think they're worthy of, but then again, you never know. They could be hiding in plain sight. But the Baha'is try to synthesize all these different faiths, and they try to preach, peace and love and all that. So fine and well, good for them. As long as they're not trying to rape my wife or stab me in the face, I'm good with that,
Okay.
Why do you think the administration systems of state, certainly in the UK and other places, are protecting and almost sponsoring the introduction of Islam?
You've got so we'd have to head into conspiracy theory territory, but you have the long march through the institutions by the socialists. Remember, communism is the end stage of socialism, where you go back to the garden where the government withers away, the state withers away. This mythical state, we all go back to the garden and we pick berries and live with our clothing, or whatever the case might be, right? That's the end state of communism. Now, socialism is obviously the method to get there. And so you've got the communists who hate the West and who are anti-Christian, and you have the Muslims who are anti-Christian and hate the West, and they are working together. Also, the Muslims have a lot of money, and they have been spending money to influence politics around the world. They've inveigled their way. Now, people blame the Jews here constantly, but when you start to look at the evidence for what the Arabs and what the Muslims have done, that starts to stack up, because quite bluntly, who's got more money? Okay, the Israeli state or the Saudis who are floating on oil, right? Who has more billionaires in the country, Israel or Saudi Arabia? So when you start looking at the money, right, you start following the money trail, trust me, the Muslims are just so wealthy. And they've been using this to buy influence, to intimidate, and they've been founding, just like the Chinese have founded these Confucius Institutes in university, the Muslims have been doing the same, funding the top 13, especially they've targeted the top 100 North American universities, for instance, but the top 13 have received billions of dollars in funding, most of it undeclared, most of it even unknown. So they have been funding, shall we say, research and, friendly behaviors towards them, friendly attitudes, and they've been paying for things to go their way. So they have been infiltrating the banks, the governments. And also I would say that it's very likely there are many, many secret Muslims. If you look at Barack Obama, I would say he is a Muslim. He might claim otherwise, but Barack Hussein Obama, he is a Muslim. His name is Islamic, and his behaviors, the things you see him do. He's certainly very Islamic friendly in many ways. He went to Al-Azhar University as his first act as president to bow and scrape to the highest authority of Islam, and various other things. And I know for a fact, when I worked in security, that many black American celebrities have converted to Islam but won't say so openly. Then you've got like guys like Keith Ellison. You look at the Muslim Brotherhood; they are everywhere. So they've been infiltrating. Yeah, go on.
The Shriners, maybe you can say something about them.
I should do a show on that separately, so then I can. Okay, so the Freemasons. Now I'm going to throw a spanner in the works because I take exception to a lot of people that I think are easily gullible, and in many cases just outright stupid. And I had years of grief from a lot of these people, as you know, Harry, from my previous discussion. It got to the point where the authorities had to get involved, so this really annoys me when I think about it. So the Sufis are regarded as the outcasts of Islam, or an outcast group. The Sufis are the main authority within Islam. The Sufis are the pinnacle. The Sufis are the elite. The Sufis are the elite of Islam. The Sufis claim to have started the Freemasons because the Sufis claim to be the original Freemasons. The Sufis claim to be the original Freemasonic sect. They claim to have created the Scottish rite of Freemasonry by having infiltrated and corrupted the Templar Knights, and then they smuggled their Sufi Freemason ideas into Scotland through the Templars. They claim that they founded Freemasonry, okay, and then they corrupted the Templars, and then so they claim to be the original. Now, every Freemason who wants to elevate himself beyond what the Freemasons can give them will join the Shriners. So not every Freemason is a Shriner, but every Shriner is a Freemason. So when you want to excel above the Freemasons, you join the Shriners, and the Shriners are explicitly Islamic. In fact, the Shriners are explicitly Sufi. Okay, and also if you look at the Muslim Brotherhood, you look at Hassan al-Banna, right? He's a Sufi, and the Sufi founded the Muslim Brotherhood. The world's largest secret society is Muslim. Okay, they've got something like 100 million adherents. They've got maybe 2 million members. No one really knows. Okay, it's not, they're called secret for a reason, obviously. So they have a huge following, lots of money, and incredible influence, and they are the foundation of all of the modern Islamic terror groups. Right, they're the source of all these modern Islamic terror groups, and so they are Sufis. They are Freemasons. Hassan al-Banna means the builder in Arabic. Okay, and builder is the Arabization of Mason. So he was a Freemason. He's acknowledged to have been a Freemason since the age of 12. So the Freemasons are Islamic, and I can show you evidence to that effect, that the Freemasons are an Islamic organization. They're not a Jewish organization, they're Islamic. The Shriners are explicitly Muslim. Okay? And the Shriners are the Uber Freemasons. So I'll leave it at that. That's a discussion for another day. But people who don't know Islam have a lot to say, and they really should stop talking.
Is it all related to money from Manichaeism? I forgot.
Manichaeism. No, Manichaeism is a syncretist Gnostic faith, which was very influential, had a huge impact on Islam. In fact, it influenced Muhammad's beliefs because it was heavily propagated, and it survived in Arabia until the 4th century, late 4th century, or something like that. So a lot of the ideas, the anti-Christian, the Gnostic ideas within Islam are derived from Manichaeism, which was just, I mean, it's just nuts. Okay, so a lot of the ideas that the Gnostic ideas, the explicit Gnostic ideas within Islam, because Islam does explicitly claim, and the Islamic scholars do explicitly claim, in fact, the Sufis claim to be and I have shown you this reference, the Sufis do claim to be the perfect Illuminati. Okay, the Sufis claim to be the perfect Illuminati, not the Jews, the Sufis. Okay, Muslims. Sufis are Muslims.
Yeah, you showed me the reference for that.
Yeah. Now, again, this is a discussion that I have to start bringing out the evidence. But, you see, people don't understand. Islam has two faces, the Sharia and the Haqiqah. The Sharia is the law. Do what you're told. Right? Everyone only knows the Sharia face of Islam, the law. Do what you're told. The other side is reserved only for the elite of Islam, and that is the Sufi scholars. There are 4 levels of understanding within Islam: the Ibara, the Ishara, the Lataif, and the Haqqaiq. This is the understanding of reality, the perfect understanding of reality as it is. This is where your soul, your consciousness merges with God, merges with Allah in this case. So the Lataif is for the dunces, the idiots, the masses. It is literally called Islam for the masses. That is John Q. Abdul, who doesn't like what I'm saying. He is at the absolute lowest bottom level of understanding. He's the peon. The Quran sits at the bottom level of understanding. If you know the Quran, it means you're an idiot. Okay? Because that is at the Ibadah level, the lowest. It's the literal level of Islam. I can do a show on this again. We can discuss this in depth and detail. The next level is the Ishara, meant for your Imams. Above that, now you get to the Sufis, because you got the legal side of Islam, and then you have the spiritual side. Now we call it spiritual, quote unquote. It means the occult side of Islam. That is reserved for the spiritual scholars of Islam, who are the Sufi. Okay? So the character of Allah, the nature of Allah, is not present in the Quran. You've got these laws, you've got what He says to do and not do. But the spiritual understanding is found through reading between the lines of the books, and that's where in the Sharia manuals of the scholars, the Sufis, they're the ones who've communed with Allah. They now understand His nature, and they are the perfect Illuminati. They are the perfect scholars, the perfect Gnostics, as they claim. Because all the Gnostics that came before them were a bunch of losers who couldn't find the truth, but the Muslim scholars did.
Okay. Anyway, I think if it's okay with you, we will finish for tonight.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Sure. I'm done. My throat's hurting anyway.
So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. God bless you for everything that you do. This is incredible, incredible work.